Oh, good for him, I guess. I don't know. I thought he was a paralegal. At Uncle's Law Firm.
Ready?
But-
Good morning, everybody. I want to make sure you silence your phones. We are beginning. Good morning. This is Tuesday, September 6th, 2022. This is a workshop meeting of the Commissioners of City Rehoboth Beach, live City Hall, Commissioners Room, second floor. Welcome. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 9:01 a.m. With that, will you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. With that, we'll start off with roll call. Commissioner Tony Sharp.
Here.
Commissioner Jay Legree.
Here.
Commissioner Ed Stranowski, absent at this point. Commissioner Susan Gay.
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Gossett.
Here.
Commissioner Tim Bennett.
Here.
And Mayor Stan Mills. We have a quorum and are able to formally conduct business today. Thank you all for being here, and I'd like to thank all those that are here in person. And typically, as we go along, at certain points, I will call on members of the public if they would like to say anything. You raise your hand, come up front to the microphone, state your name and your relationship to the city, and that way we can receive your input on the different topics today. With that, I also want to thank those that are watching virtually. Appreciate that. They've got the luxury of watching it at home in their living room, in their bathrobe, or whatever they want, and watch it as many times as they want because it is recorded afterwards. With that, I want to remind everybody that we have what we call support documents. They are documents that support our agenda items. And when available prior to a meeting, they are embedded into the agenda, electronic version of the agenda on our cityofrehoboth.com website in the portal. And with that, I want to indicate that I'm changing the order of some of the sequencing today for some of the agenda items. We're going to start off first with the Presbyterian license agreement. Then we're going to go to the rezoning request. And then when we get toward the end, we've got a very, very full agenda. We're going to be monitoring it. And we might have to cut one or two things off, but I would like to try to get the state road project discussion in prior to the trash discussion. So stay tuned. And with that, we have correspondence identified, and that is embedded in the agenda as a support document. You'll see that from Tom Childers, T-O-M Childers. And with that, we'll move right along to identifying the staff that's here. I'm sorry, I usually forget that. City Secretary Ann Womack, Interim City Manager Evan Miller, City Solicitor Glenn Mandalis, Officer Jamie Riddle, Public Works Supervisor Kevin Williams, Communications Specialist Lynn Williams, and Matt Janis, Head of the Building and Licensing Department. Thank you all for being here also and participating. With that, we're going to go right to the City Manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, members of the public. An update on the Norfolk water main replacement and the street paving project. Pre-construction meeting was held with ADEL last week, so that was last Monday, and they're scheduled to begin work a little bit sooner than originally anticipated. The water main replacement on Norfolk Street will begin Monday, September 12th. They will begin at the Norfolk-Scarborough intersection and work towards Bayard Avenue, and the work hours will be 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. They'll maintain local access for the residents on Norfolk, but the road will be closed to through traffic. Signage and flaggers will be on site to help traffic flow, and once we get the contractor's official schedule, we will post that to the city's current project page on the website. 2 digital message boards were posted last week to give advance notice to the residents. And we'll also get out notice about the upcoming work via Lines in the Sand, social media, and the Rehoboth Beacon alerts. We'll also be posting door hangers 48 hours prior to any water outages that are scheduled. In updates so far, we've had 12 of the 57 impacted properties contact us for estimates for either sewer laterals or concrete work. So we'll continue to get that word out. Update on the Neighbors app that the police department is now encouraging residents to sign up for. The police department has joined Neighbors by Ring. It's an app that allows public safety agencies and neighbors to share real-time crime and safety alerts. This does not cost the city anything, and it's free to residents to sign up. The app allows law enforcement agencies like Rehoboth Beach Police to better engage with and inform the communities they serve. The app, which is available via App Store and Google Play, allows users to share alerts about crime or safety within a specified radius around their home address. Users are confidential, and all posts are vetted by the Neighbors app prior to being made public. The app can utilize images and video from video doorbells. And while the app is created by Ring, anyone with a compatible iOS or Android device can download and use Neighbors for free. So to increase the safety of Rehoboth residents and the neighborhoods, the police department encourages residents to consider downloading and utilizing the app. Water line inspections, an update on that project. We're continuing with the water line inspections. Last week, the water department had completed the door-to-door survey of the original investigation area. And you recall that was the south side of town, the third blocks between Bayard and Scarborough. The water department has now moved on to the streets east of Bayard between Lake Drive and Philadelphia Street. And the website's current city project page continues to be updated as we make progress. An update on the guarded beach. So through September 25th, lifeguards will strive to cover the beach from the Henlopen Hotel to Hickman Street. If the beach is unguarded, there will be signs posted notifying beachgoers that the beach is unguarded. One of the things we have started doing at the end of the night shift is trash pickup along the beach. This seems to be working better, and the beach looks much better early in the morning for the folks wanting to watch the sunrise. An update on parking revenue for the month of August. Parking meter revenue for the month of August was $1,819,345. That's compared to last year, $1,275,775. Currently, our year-to-date revenue exceeds budgeted revenue by $1,048,143, and those numbers were as of last week. Finally, I'm happy to report that the city has received the Government Finance Officer Association's Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for the fiscal year beginning April 1st, 2022. This is our second year receiving this award, and it demonstrates the city's commitment to meeting the highest principles of governmental budgeting. And that's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions of the city manager?
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Gossett?
Are lifeguards through the 25th 7 days or just weekends?
I believe they're 7 days.
All right, and then will we start weekends only after that for a while?
Yeah, and then we have some coming back around fall, so.
All right. And for next either workshop or regular meeting, would it be possible to get the budget report comments through August or September?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Mayor, I'd just like to say on the budget award that big congratulations to all the folks involved and the staff that does a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you,
Appreciate that.
Commissioner, because that is a big deal. It was a big deal last year as the first year, and 2 years in a row, that's an exceptional deal. I'm glad to recognize him. With that, we'll go to the city solicitor's report.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of litigation updates. First on the 330 Hospitality Group versus Rehoboth Beach Board of Adjustment, or Rehoboth Beach case. This is the rezoning case that was denied. As you will recall, we filed a motion to dismiss that case rather than defending it on the merits. We thought there was reasons to dismiss the case early on. So the city filed through Dan Griffith, our outside insurance defense attorney. We filed our reply brief. So at this point, all the briefing is done on the motion to dismiss. So we're in that 90-day window, waiting for a decision from the court. If the court dismisses the case, that'll be the end of it unless it's appealed. If the court does not grant our motion to dismiss, then the case will go forward on the merits. Ocean Bay Mart, September 20th will mark the 60 days into the 90-day window. We're still waiting for a final decision on that, so September 20 is 60 days out of that 90-day period for the court to make a decision. And then finally, in the Margaret versus Rehoboth Beach Board of Adjustment case, oral arguments were conducted on Tuesday, August 30th. So now that case is fully briefed, and we're waiting on a decision. The 90-day window is just starting on that one. Any questions on litigation?
Solicitor, on either one of those, on the appeal process, what would be the next step for appeal?
So in the Ocean Bay Mart case, we are literally at the end. Once a decision comes there, we're at the Supreme Court. So the only other court in the nation we can go to on that one is the U.S. Supreme Court. Not likely. So that one, there's likely no appeal period, or no appeal. The Margaret case, which will be done, is that's the Board of Adjustment case. It's in the Superior Court before Judge Karsnitz. If that is appealed, it will be appealed to the Delaware Supreme Court. There is a 30-day window to 20-day window to appeal that case, depending when it is decided. Then on the 330 Hospitality Group case, that one, same. Yeah, once it comes out, there'll be an appeal, 20-day appeal to the Delaware Supreme Court.
Thank you.
On that 60-day timeframe for the beach wall case, are you saying that's when the decision is expected, or is it still possibly 90 days? You were just giving that as a landmark time?
No, I think, right, it's still a 90-day window.
Oh, it is,
But
okay.
September 20th will mark the 60th day
Okay.
into that 90-day window. So we're getting there.
I
guess is the
get
point.
it,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Yeah. It could come out any day, but it will come out within those 90 days.
Right, okay.
Thank you very much. With that, we're going to go, as I mentioned earlier, change of sequencing here. Next item of business is new business B. Discuss a request to approve a license agreement between the city and the Presbytery of Newcastle to license the use of that part of Cranberry Park, which adjoins 41 Olive Avenue to a depth of 12 feet from the rear property line of the property line located at 41 Olive Avenue. This is an introductory discussion. If everything goes fine, our next step would be to consider approval of the license agreement at our September regular voting meeting. So again, this is an introduction. How I'd like to start off is with Glenn Mandalis, just to give us a brief overview of what is a license agreement. Then I'd like to go to Interim City Manager Evan Miller, to explain how we came to be here today. And then I would like to review the draft license agreement. And if you would set up the document camera to be ready for me, I'd appreciate it. So Glenn, just
Thanks, Mayor.
overall, what is a license agreement?
Sure. So a little bit different than a land lease. A land lease, creates it does create a larger property interest in the property that's being leased. So it's a little bit more difficult for the city to break a land lease because those property rights attach. A license agreement, which is what's being considered today or being discussed today, doesn't create that degree of a property interest. It allows somebody to use the licensed area. But as you'll see in this document, it's terminated much easier than a lease agreement, but it still gives rights to a second party to use the city's land, licensed to use the land. And that's pretty much the difference. They're just a little bit different property interest, easier to terminate.
And is there a difference between licensing use of city property and city right-of-way? Are they the same thing?
City right-of-way and city property are the same thing. A city right-of-way is pretty much already dedicated to public use, whereas the city park, for example, which is under consideration here, it's dedicated to city use, but you don't have the vehicular and pedestrian travel as much as you would over a city right-of-way. City rights-of-way are platted on a map and show them as rights-of-way for public use. A city park, which is being considered today, is probably less traveled. So they're very similar in that they're still public property.
All right, that's apropos to an agenda item later in our agenda. With that, I'll turn it over to City Manager Evan Miller.
Sure, thank you.
How'd we get here?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So Back in, I believe it was June, a building permit application was submitted for the property, 41 Olive Avenue. Before approving the permit, we needed to verify that the license agreement to use part of Cranberry Park was still in place and that we had a copy of that agreement. We went through all of our records and could not find a copy of that agreement. We did, however, we were able to confirm that they have been paying the annual fee, which is $10, all the way up through 2022. So we also had touched base with the applicant and had, again, found out that they were also unable to locate a copy of the lease agreement. So with that being said, we started the process of creating a new lease agreement. We were able to find an example lease agreement from a neighboring property using a similar portion of Cranberry Park. So we have started to draft that license agreement or that lease agreement.
Very good, thank you. So the commissioners have a copy of this. Unfortunately, we didn't get it in time to even complete it and get it out to embed it in our agenda. So what I'd like to do is, again, this is a facsimile. This is not an exact copy of what the previous license agreement was. What some of the important things in here include that, and there we go. So some of the important things in here are that it identifies what the encroachment is. Licensor hereby grants to licensee permission to maintain the existing utility encroachment and stair encroachment in an existing area extending 12 feet in the licensors. Do they have a stair encroachment? Or is this taken from a neighbor's? You have a stair encroachment? You do, okay. In the area, there's a 12-foot area there. And that diagram here,
It does identify stairs on the
Okay.
other survey.
okay, I wanted to make sure. Back here is Cranberry Park, also known as Lake Gerard Park. Here is the lake for orientation. That puts Olive Avenue down here. Olive Avenue in the second block from the ocean. They've got a very long walkway here, and actually, they have an updated plan here that shows a handicap ramp to get to a two-story house with a porch. And then they're showing back here is what is back here, Glenn?
Some form of utility, Mayor. We can talk to the applicant, but I think it's probably some form of HVAC unit.
Okay, for a shed, and then here's a staircase here. So we do have the applicant here if we have any questions. One of the things of interest to me, and Glenn, maybe you can explain it, is that this is for a 12-foot area here. Normally, a lot of the encroachments and license agreements are specific to an exact area, which would mean it would have a license agreement to allow the stairs on there, and it would allow to have the utility area on there.
Right, Mayor. So normally we will identify the specific encroachments and how far they encroach. So we'd say, you know, the utility encroachment is 8 foot into it by 4 feet. And so we license the actual encroached area rather than a full 12-foot area. But this one seems to have previously, from what we can tell, actually licensed a 12-foot area extending behind the Presbyterian's property.
Right, so just to reiterate, there are some stairs here that normally the stairs would be included in the license agreement, and then here is the utility shed, and normally just that area would be there. Whereas this license agreement includes the entirety of the 12-foot depth behind the house, behind the property, and so that could either be addressed with this license agreement or left alone. What I do want to point out is that in the copy that was distributed, because again, this is new, The formula for creating the annual fee was based on recent license agreement actions, and that was $1 a square foot. And I know we're going to be talking about license agreement later today, but again, this is a replacement license agreement. The original license agreement was $10 a year. I would suggest that we go back to $10 a year for this because, again, it's a replacement license agreement for one that we lost. So that's up for discussion as well. If you stuck with the $1 per square foot, I believe the calculation was about 504 square feet. And so that'd be about $500 a year versus $10 a year. With that, I'm going to sit down, but would you like to, we have a representative of the Presbytery here. If you'd like to say anything, why don't you come up to here? This microphone works a little better. I'd like you to do, if you would please, identify yourself, your relationship to the town, and then give us your hard sell there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, Commissioners. My name is Shannon Hansen. I am an ordained minister in the Newcastle Presbytery, which covers all of Delaware and the Eastern Shore of Maryland. I am here in my capacity as the president of the trustees of Newcastle Presbytery, and the trustees are responsible for all real property issues concerning the Presbytery. 41 Olive Avenue is known by the Presbytery as the Hayloft. It was deeded to the Presbytery by a congregate when she died in 1973, and it has since 1973 been used as a place of respite for ministers and their families within Newcastle Presbytery. It is my understanding, and I am more than happy to answer any questions that anyone might have, but it is my understanding that the license agreement has been extant as long as we have owned the property, that is to say, since 1973, and it was and always has been a de minimis amount. That amount is $10. My understanding is that all of the property surrounding the 41 Olive Avenue had homes that were built directly on the property line, and that is why the stairs go over into Cranberry Park, as does the utility shed. And we would we run the property at a deficit every year, and we are respectfully requesting that the land lease agreement be re-executed by the city of Rehoboth, and that a de minimis amount be continued in the land lease agreement. And again, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that the commissioners would care to answer, or Mr. Mayor, that you would care to answer, sir.
Right. So thank you, Shannon. Stay there in case anybody has questions. Again, I would reiterate that this license agreement is to replace one that was existing before and lost. It is a reasonable, I think, facsimile, especially when it comes to the articulating and describing the area that meets the encroachment and that would fulfill the license agreement. The one change is the fee, which I'm suggesting, rather than the $1 formula we've been using of late, be changed back to the $10 per annum. Is there any further discussion? Any discussion among the commissioners? Again, the next step would be this would be put on September meeting for consideration. Glenn, do you have?
Thank you, Mayor. Just for purposes of drafting, you said it's a utility shed in the back. What is in that utility shed, if you know?
It is my understanding that it is the water main for the area, and there is also an outdoor shower.
Okay.
But the reason that we were seeking approval originally, the original building permit, was because we'd had flooding issues, and so we wanted to fix the water.
Got it.
And the stairs referenced are just
truly
according to
the
this, 3 stairs on the back?
3 steps on the very back of the house, as I understand it. At the time these houses were built, which is sometime earlier, significantly earlier in the 1900s, the houses were built on the property line.
Right, right. Okay, what confused me earlier about stairs is that the house directly next door got a license agreement for a 2nd-story staircase. So this is just ground level, 3 stairs. Any discussion?
Could I ask one more question?
Oh,
Mayor?
yes, sir.
And the intention is to make the repairs within the utility shed, but not to do any extensions or any new encroachments?
There is no intention to engage in any new encroachment. It's simply to be able to continue to use the house and the back door of the house. That's why the stairs are there, and to be able to make the repairs.
And so my understanding of the license agreement is that the license agreement has to be executed, Matt, before building permit would be issued. And saying that, the license agreement does say in there what the exact encroachment is, what the license agreement applies to, and that it can't be expanded. Right. Commissioner Sharp?
I just wanted a clarification, since this is awfully new. I gather that the city cannot locate the agreement, and nor can the applicant?
Right. That's right, but we have historical documents suggesting or showing that they've paid a license fee since whenever, all the way up through 2022. So everything leads to the conclusion that there was a license agreement. It's just unlocatable.
And the fee's been paid since 73?
Yeah, what we have is, they have some kind of index card system that we have that proves they've been paying over the years.
Okay,
But this is no substitute for the license agreement. That's why we need to,
okay, and what you're showing me, I don't have that yet, right?
no.
Okay. Thank you.
So Mayor or City Manager, are all of the homes in that area, do they all have a licensing agreement? Do they all have an encroachment or?
Oh, do you know?
I am showing, based on Commissioner Gossett's research, I think somewhat recently, as many as 5, I think, license agreements to use a part of Cranberry Park adjacent to the property exist currently, and they're all a $10 annual fee.
So it's all the same?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe they're all 12 feet,
Yes.
12-foot encroachment. So that's where, my mention of should it just be, the license agreement just describe the exact encroachment versus giving them an entirety of 12 feet. I have mixed feelings about that. I feel it ought to be, probably should be just the area of the encroachment, but I also recognize that everybody else has 12 feet, and that this is a replacement for one that was lost. So, what's the pleasure of the commissioners? Just to change this document to $10 a year and leave the description as is?
And what would the length of that time frame be?
Essentially, it's in perpetuity.
Yes, the
until-
license agreements have, I'm sorry, Mayor. Read it briefly. So the license agreements have no termination date, but there's a 90-day window, notice window for us to terminate any license for the city to terminate any license that it issues.
Is it only for termination, or would there be any, if you wanted to change something in a license agreement?
So if you wanted to change, I mean, if they wanted to change something to increase it or to build something new within it, they'd have to come back to you to revise or do an addendum to the license agreement. If the city wanted to change the terms of the license agreement, we could terminate this and any other license agreement within 90 days and then issue a new license agreement with the revised terms.
Got it, thank you.
Well, and you'll hear me later under the license topic, that the termination date, just like the fees and everything else, there's no consistency. And I'll bring that up again at that later topic. So is there any further commissioner discussion? Commissioner Gossett?
Further question, yeah. Curious to make this decision now versus the agenda under old business, discuss the structure and policy objectives for issuance of license agreements authorizing encroachments of a structure into the city right away. is this discussion about this, I know it's building permit issue and timing is everything, but it seems a bit premature to me to make decisions on this when we may be making changes, to this for future management.
And I think a case could be made for that, Commissioner. However, this is just one of, I don't know that many is the right term, but one of
We have 26 license
a good
agreements.
number of license agreements that are lost and unidentified that we need to identify and fulfill, redo. So again, as I mentioned earlier, because this is a replacement, I'm willing to just go back to the original standards. So I don't disagree with it, but for new ones, I think we would be holding off until we have that discussion.
Hey, Mayor,
Okay, Commissioner Legree?
how many other similar situations exist in that area? Do they use that area? Is there other structures from other properties? What does the area look like as far as?
Do you remember, the very first house, when you're going down Olive toward the ocean, has 12-foot encroachment. The next house is her son's house. The next house is another house, Miss Cochran's house, the neighbor's house, Jerry's house, this house. But not all of them, I don't think, have that 12-foot, only about 5 of them, unless there's ones we're missing.
Again, I'm showing maybe 5 or 6 license agreements to use a part of Cranberry Park. We'd have to pull the license agreements that we can find. I know we've been able to find at least one, but I think it was a similar situation where it was a 12-foot encroachment.
Infrastructure, it sounded like they had water out on this one. Do they have landscaping, and what kind of uses are being made of those areas right now?
Yeah.
Well, that's just it. We don't know because we don't record that, and we've given them 12 feet, so they could put a picnic table there, they could have a dining table there, they could park a car there, they have all kinds of options that we don't regulate with this license agreement. That's where I would again suggest in the future that as we consider license agreements, that they only pertain to the actual encroachment and not, it's kind of a luxury for those people to have not only extra land, but parkland, beautiful parkland there. Do you want to add anything?
Only that the current encroachments, if you will, are being taken care of. So we don't have any, massive forests or anything like that there being landscaped, being maintained. So that's a plus, I think.
That's where I was headed.
Right.
Do these, Solicitor, do these license agreements go with the land or with the owner?
They do. They are assignable when the property transfers to a new owner without any additional action by the commissioners.
They transfer?
They do transfer. They go with the land.
And just to take that thought a step further, that could mean a new owner, not to digress here, but just for clarification, a new owner could operate completely differently than the previous owner, relevant to the 12 feet, to your point, Mayor.
They could, if there's no picnic table there now, the new owner could put a picnic table there again, but this is their document that they have to follow. Right.
I guess what this feels like to me is a correction of administrative paperwork.
That's a very polite way of saying, we screwed up and lost it.
I wasn't, Mayor, you see, Mayor, work with me, I wasn't going to say that. So in the short term, for me, it corrects a current failing, and we will be going further on a different track.
Very, very possibly, out of discussion later today. So again, where I'm leaning toward is correcting this license agreement, this draft license agreement, to reflect a $10 an annual year fee, and to leave the 12-foot area as is, because I haven't heard anybody oppose that. Again, what our next step would be is to put it exactly like that in front of us and the public at the September voting meeting. With that, I'd like to go to the members of the public. Shannon, do you have anything else further you want to say?
No, I just wanted to thank the various folks who work for the city of Rehoboth who have diligently helped us in this process. And because it has been, we've all learned a great deal from it. So I wanted to publicly thank
Very
them.
good. So we'll let you take your seat. Is there any other members of the public who would like to speak on this issue? If not, we'll
Mayor, I do have one other comment. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. This is an administrative error, if you will, that needs to be corrected or continued, if you will. But I think that going forward, this is an opportunity for us to investigate this. I don't believe that $10 a year would cover any administrative costs for staff time, for billing, for check processing, mailing, that type of thing. And I also am concerned that this carries through with the land. I think that if we rewrite this, this particular lease agreement, that it should terminate at the time the property is sold or change hands, that there's a deed transfer or title transfer. Because if not, this will just go into perpetuity and get lost again or something of this nature. This, to me, is an opportunity for us to establish an appropriate administrative process that will carry through for the future. We have, as my research goes, 26 fees or property fees on the books now, and all of them are at $10 a year. And together that brings us up to about $1,200 a year in processing fees, that the revenue that the city takes. And I just don't feel that that's an accurate reflection on our responsibility to keep fiduciary responsibility of spending the money properly with the city. So again, with this particular agreement, I would say go forward because it is an administrative correction, but that I would feel strongly that it should not carry through the land, that it should only carry through the owner, and at a time of deed change or title change, that this should terminate and we would restructure it based on conversations maybe later today that we have on licensing agreements.
Yeah, again, later in the conversation, we have in old business, discuss fee structure and policy objectives for issuance of license agreements authorizing encroachment of a structure in the city right of way. So you can see where maybe we're getting a little ahead of ourselves on stuff, but that will come
But still,
back and
that's
we'll talk
part of the
about
discussion.
fees and stuff like that. In
considered.
terms of termination dates, I think we would have to get a determination from Glenn on the wisdom of terminating license agreements upon the sale. I remember something maybe with restaurants and permits of compliance that came up years ago. And there was a great outcry because termination of permits of compliance, by my recollection, the outcry was that, well, now you're devaluing us being able to sell it and continuing to operate in the fashion that it has been. So I don't know if that would apply to this or not, but I would be wary about it.
My vision of that is that's apples and oranges in the sense that this is a residential zoning area, and this is city property with a restaurant or something of that nature. That is private property. This is the city's property that we own and can have set these areas that are permissible for the owner of the abutting property to use. I just don't think that's a valid argument.
I guess two things to raise with that. One is, when property conveys, you look to get title insurance. A title company would not issue title insurance until a new license. If this document says that it terminates upon conveyance, a title insurance company will say, show me that you have a new license agreement before I issue title. A mortgage company would do the same thing. Mortgage company will not mortgage property where the water main's coming into the back and the utility shed until it's shown that there's a continuation of that license agreement to be able to issue that mortgage. So that's the two considerations that a new property owner would have. But
Are we obligated then to continue the licenses?
no, I mean, it'd just be an extra step, obviously, that a buyer would have to go through before they could get title insurance and a mortgage on the property.
But what I'm hearing is it is doable.
It's doable, but it's not insignificant.
But they still have to provide that existing documentation, so what's the difference between looking at existing documentation and looking at a new documentation, perhaps that we don't lose, or we can revise the amount of money spent or charge for that particular operation? I mean, we're raising salaries, we're buying new software. I mean, the overhead cost is always growing, and we've been charging $10 since 1968. I just don't, again, think that's a fiduciary responsibility that we as commissioners are responsible for, and I just don't think that's a way to manage taxpayers' money.
Well, not hearing any other response, I'm going to go ahead and direct the city manager to complete this. As I mentioned earlier, we've always got the opportunity at the meeting to change the termination date, don't we?
You do. That's paragraph 8 that you're talking about, Commissioner Gossett. So
I don't have those documents.
Right. So paragraph 8 currently says licensee agrees that any conveyance of the licensee's property shall be subject to and together with the benefits of this license agreement. So that paragraph says it does convey with it. So that's a consideration item for you all September 15 on your meeting. I'll leave it that way for now. And if you,
I'm confused. I thought the document that I have, which is the license agreement, is for our discussion on old business C, which is upcoming.
that's right.
Am I confused?
No. Today.
Okay, just say no.
No, you never are. Never.
Yes, you have a sample
Yeah.
license agreement.
Yeah.
That is the other topic.
But isn't that the point that Commissioner Gossett's making?
So today,
But it's for the other agenda item.
right. Today you have a broader
Okay,
topic.
what I'm trying to get to is for this agenda item, it's for the September voting meeting, correct?
Right. That's correct.
So could we just move on to be direct?
I'm ready.
that's where the mayor
I'm
was
ready. I think that's what I just said, but.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Thank you, everybody. With that, our second change of sequence will be new business C. Discuss request on behalf of Richard and Stephanie Marsch of Ocean Ventures Property LLC to rezone the property at 20663 Coastal Highway from a C3 zoning classification to a C1 classification. Again, if you go to cityrehoboth.com, go to the portal, look for the agenda and today's date. You will have a copy of the rezoning request from the applicant's attorney. You also have the mayor's acknowledgement and the mayor's support document showing chapters 270 zoning, the C1 and C3 zoning use regulations. With that, is there any representatives? Would you just state your name and what your relationship is to the property and the people, and then we'll pause and come back to you in a second.
Thank you, Mayor, and pleasure to be here with you this morning, Mayor and Commissioners. Thank you for hearing this initial discussion about the rezoning.
So we just want your name and relationship, and then we'll get back to you for some more details.
My name is Carlton Savage. I am a professional engineer with Scaled Engineering in Rehoboth Beach, address being 20246 Coastal Highway, Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. I'm representing the owner of the property, Mr. Marsch, and his wife, Stephanie. You are correct, the Ocean Ventures Properties LLC is the legal owner of the property. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlton. One thing I want to point out that was not included as a support document that is worthy of all of us to take a look at, and we'll make sure it's embedded in the next agenda, is a table of use regulations. It's in the code, Chapter 270, Table of Use Regulations. And it very nicely articulates what is and is not allowed in each of the zoning districts. And of course, that will give you the opportunity to compare the C1 and the C3 zones. And you will notice that going from C3 to C1 is, C3 is a lesser intensity usage, and C1 is more heavy-duty industrial type usage. The thing is, if you look at the plat, you'll see that this one property that is identified backs up to residential property. So really, some of our paths forward today is what I'm asking us to decide on. Some of the process could be that we may decide to take it up ourselves as commissioners, in which case this is a change in zoning, and change in zoning requires certain steps. One step would be to adopt a resolution setting a public hearing, and then we would conduct the public hearing on this rezoning request. At other option of the commissioners, it's not required, but we are able to take this and send it over to the Planning Commission and let them look at it and make us recommendation on what they think about the request for change in zoning usage. And then after we would receive, if we go that route, after we receive the recommendations from the Planning Commission, then that would come back to the commissioners. We would then vote to adopt a resolution setting a public hearing, and then conduct the public hearing and make a decision likely after that sometime. So what that means is if we go to the Planning Commission, it's liable to take a little while longer than if we do it here. But the purpose of today is really not to receive our opinions on this. It is to have a discussion on, do we indeed want to send it to the Planning Commission, or do we want to do it in-house? I'll open that discussion to the commissioners.
I would suggest one of your options of sending it to the Planning Commission. And looking at this is a, if you will, an upzoning from C3 to C1. In my research, I don't think we've ever upzoned anything in the city since zoning was established. I just think that the Planning Commission has more ability to kind of research these issues with regards to backing up of residential and commercial. I also note that this is part of or adjacent to Ocean Bay Mart, which we're still waiting to hear of a result of the lawsuit that's existing there. There's a thin strip of land that exists between these two pieces of property, the existing Marshes that own the great garage that there's now, but also this other piece of property. And I don't know if there is anything that would make a difference with having a dividing strip of land between the two parcels. May not, may have, I don't know, but I think that's something that the Planning Commission could look into a little deeper than we have the ability to. That's my feeling.
Thank you. Commissioner Sharp?
I concur with Commissioner Gossett for all the reasons he stated.
Any further comment?
I do as well. And we I think, the last time there was a rezoning request, it was referred to the Planning Commission, so there is a precedent there as well.
And the chair concurs also that we will send this to the Planning Commission. This is not in the CDP, correct?
That's right.
And you explained to me why it does not have to be in the CDP for us to be able to act on this.
Right, so this property is not, my recollection is this property is not shown on the future land use map. The land use map doesn't designate C1 or C3, it designates residential or commercial, and this is designated as commercial because it currently is a C3 zoning, so it would not need to go through the plus process. It would not have to have a comprehensive plan amendment to make this change if you choose to do so.
Again, not in the CDP. Planning Commission is very zoning savvy, so I'm leaning that way. With that, if there's no further comment, I'd like to go to Mr. Savage, see if you had any addendums that you would like to share. Again, this is an introductory discussion for us. and you can see the way we might be headed, but then we'll go to the public afterwards.
Thank you. Again, Carlton Savage with Scaled Engineering. Thank you for your understanding of the project. I'll add a few minor things just to keep in mind. It sounds like most of this will be discussed possibly at a planning commission meeting. The real reason that we're here today is simply one single use. I know you guys can't consider that one single use, but the C3 zoning would not allow Mr. Marsch and his business to expand physical garages and repair auto service shops. That would be a C1 use, and I think you guys are well aware of that. That is his intent with the project. That would be what he would be looking to do should it be rezoned. Another thing to point out is I think the worry of spot zoning always comes up in these types of applications. This is an extension of the C1 zone. The little strip of land known as Ocean Bay Mark is also C1. So the use and zoning would be consistent, even though I think their initial plan was residential condominium style. It was C1 zoning. The properties to the north actually are zone C3 as well. I think there's 4 properties that actually jump over Scarborough. Those 4 properties are C3, but they're currently being used as residential. And I think they've recently been rebuilt, most of those. So really you're left with no C3 land in this location that's being used as C3. You only simply have C1. So as we move forward, I think that's a big consideration. Other than that, I think we explained the project a little more, explain the intent of the use at Planning Commission, if that's the way it goes. Appreciate you guys hearing this and considering it.
Thank you very much. Any questions of the Mr. Carlton? Mr. Savage? With that, we'll go to the members of the public. Again, this is not a public hearing. We're not here to solicit your opinions on the rezoning. But at this point, if you have any comments on whether we do this in-house or whether we send it to the Planning Commission for their recommendations, that would be apropos. Anybody? Go ahead. I'd like you to state your name in relationship to the city, if you would, please.
My name's Stephen Thomas. Closer?
There you go.
Sorry. So my name is Stephen Thomas. I'm a homeowner right behind in 1028 Scarborough Extended. Sorry, a little nervous. So for me, I think you should go to the Planning Commission. And the reason why is because of the direct relationship, because I am directly behind them. And I use their services and they do a great job. Mm-hmm. And I also think they're a very cleanly, good operation. However, you know, I have a thin fence, so obviously, you know, what goes behind my fence and what is above. Right now, I look out and see a 2-story house, and in the future, I might look out and see a, 20-foot building, which I will say they do look impressive. And then also, I use that Route 1 as my access to go up and down, so I don't know how the Planning Commission and how they work with Route 1, but I know there has been some accidents in that area, at that red light there. So as my concern, I'm looking forward to, additional hearings and possibility of having protection from a barrier, whether it be bushes or wall or something, but that's my concern. And obviously, and gasoline, because my kids play in the backyard and things of that nature. And I do know, I got this letter actually from 1026, they said to come and represent because it is concerned because there's 4 of us that are direct behind there. So, but I do appreciate your time. And
thank you. Thank you very much. And again, there'll be many opportunities for you to voice your opinion, depending on the route forward here, either directly to the Planning Commission at multiple meetings they're likely to have, or back here. This is not a voting meeting. Do we do consensus, or do we want to put this on for a vote?
I think you can do this by consensus, Mayor. It doesn't require an action or it doesn't require an approval or disapproval. So I think you can do it by consensus. If you feel better about doing it at a voting meeting, that's is fine as well, but it's not necessary to.
Well, if there's no objections, then I'm going to task the Planning Commission with making a recommendation on this rezoning request. All right? Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Savage.
Mayor, I have one question of the solicitor, if I may, on this. What is the relationship between our zoning, the city of Rehoboth Beach zoning, and that of the county of Sussex County zoning? Is there a superseding, if you will, or?
There's not a superseding, but what will happen, what should happen is, because this abuts county land, one of the requirements of this body when you're considering rezoning is to look at the character of the neighborhood, and the character of the neighborhood is just not what's inside the city's borders, it's the entire neighborhood. So you need to look to what is the county zoned in their areas abutting the city, and how is it consistent with what's being requested here? So it is a consideration.
Just curious, because the county zoning records show it as residential.
The county zoning records show this property as residential?
Correct.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, you're the zoning authority for what is within the boundaries, so it's C3 at this point, or C1 at this, C3 at this point.
Currently, yeah.
Interesting that the county shows it as residential, though.
Now, how does that get resolved? What the county says versus what the city says?
So
We have a long list of properties in that.
there's all kinds of things, right. It depends on where it's shown as residential. I mean, typically on their comprehensive development plan, they won't show zoning for municipal properties, so it probably doesn't show up on their comp plan zoning map as zoned anything specifically. It might be designated in other locations.
On the parcel map.
On the parcel map, and then on their tax record, I suppose, probably shows it as residential. So that's something that really the property owner should be correcting with the county. We can certainly take steps to help with that, but as a property owner, I would want the county to show a proper designation.
Thank you.
But what matters is how you zone it. You're the zoning authority for that property.
Thank you.
Thank you. Some of these things take a little longer than I anticipated. Again, we've got a limited time here because we've got another committee meeting afterwards. But what I would like to do is I would like to move new business G, discuss proposal to install curb and crosswalks on State Road at Grove Street and sidewalks on a portion of Grove Street. There's a time element to that, and I'd like to ensure that we get it addressed today. Kevin?
Getting a voice gives Kevin a moment to get set
I'm
up.
sorry,
It's all
I have no idea what happened here. Putting us all silent.
It's not the worst interruption I've ever had by any means. Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick update on the State Road and Pedestrian Improvements Project that we've been working on for a couple years now. All right, let me get it working here. We're looking at the intersection of State Road and where it intersects with Grove and Munson. And if you'll recall, 2 years ago, we actually did a study. We looked at that intersection and we looked at the Canal/Hickman intersection with State in an effort to determine where it would be better sited to have a crosswalk across State Road. Our numbers were very much tilted toward the Grove-Munson interchange based on pedestrian counts, bike counts, and the like. So then we focused our attention down there and came up with a plan to design and construct a crosswalk across State Road at that particular intersection. This is what we have permitted through DelDOT in order to do. As you'll recall, it is a DelDOT-owned and maintained road. They were fine with us doing improvements on there as long as, we run it through them, get their permission, and that we pay for any of those improvements. So basically, it's a crosswalk. To the plan north is Grove heading toward the circle, and then plan south is into Country Club Estates. So we created bump outs actually to shorten the distance to get across the road, and then plan to install a crosswalk across State Road running from the planned northwest corner down to the planned southwest corner, and then to run a new one also along State Road, crossing Munson, as you can see depicted there. New ADA accessible ramps at the 3 locations, and then bump outs at the other 4 would also include the rapid rectangular flashing beacons like we had installed a year or 2 ago on Rehoboth Avenue on the planned west side to alert any traffic coming down State Road of a potential pedestrian crossing. There's what it looks like heading planned north on State Road. As you approach it, there'll be a crosswalk there, and you can kind of see the curbs. And then as you're coming from Munson heading toward the intersection, you'll see that that's where the other crosswalk would appear.
Thank you, Kevin. If you could put that back on and show the aerial view of number 2 slide, I think.
This one?
Next one, 3. There, right there. Patty's house is the top left. I've gotten, I think, Evan, you've gotten some requests by other constituents to complete the sidewalk system from here to the 7-Eleven. Now, if you know Dolph's house, I don't know how to describe, but Dolph's house behind the 7-Eleven there, that first block actually has a sidewalk, but the rest of the block does not. My point in bringing that up is that if we're going to do this, I think it behooves us to add to the project scope, filling in the sidewalk there, so that once you get to one side of the street or the other, you've actually got some place to go to. Now, are you able to show? I'm interested in. I've asked Evan to bring up that area on Google Maps. I would like to see. Again, that top area there, what the tree cover is, if there's any trees that are going to be hurt. And then just show us in general where those trees would go. There are telephone poles in that area. My position on telephone poles is we can wiggle around them, we can constrict it and still conform to ADA compliance standards. But that we should put that in as part of this project also.
What, street view or
Yeah,
overhead?
street view of Grove. I think one of the largest obstacles we have here on Grove to continue the sidewalk down would be the utility poles, as you mentioned, Mayor. So we could certainly look at installing sidewalks and bringing the sidewalk a little bit closer to the property line in areas where there are the utility poles, but all things that we can go back to our engineer and work on possible solutions.
So can we orient ourselves? Kevin, can you come backwards into that intersection? Now turn around and let's just gently walk down Grove Street toward the 7-Eleven. That's.
I do this all the time.
Well, 7-Eleven's been gone a while, Mayor, but maybe
That would be
Rise Up
Rise Up.
Coffee.
That's
or-
not gently.
Need to get out more, Mayor.
So now we're approaching what?
6th Street would be
6th
here.
Street on the left.
Right. And no,
And it's on the other side of 6th that the sidewalk starts, I
correct.
think. So we're missing that, just one block area, I believe, correct?
That's correct.
And again, I would encourage us to allow that to be inserted into the project scope so that we have additional sidewalk access up to that intersection and from that intersection. Any comments from the commissioners? What are you asking for today from us?
Just consensus to move forward, Mayor. As Kevin had mentioned, this project's been in the works for a couple of years now. I know Streets and Transportation Committee's talked about it. We've done the silent policeman up by Canal. That was another location that we were looking at possibly doing crosswalks there, some curb work, but ultimately settled on this location because of the high demand with pedestrian traffic, the lack of sidewalks, and proximity to Rise Up and Royal Farm, some of the other destinations around the circle.
And so how does that fit in funding? You haven't funded this yet, right? So are we making a commitment to fund it?
Correct. So it would be a continuation of the design to include that portion of the sidewalk then, and then pursue funding. We're headed into the budget now, and then there's also other sources that we have looked at. One would be the TAP program, DelDOT TAP program. Participated in a webinar just the other day on that program, and then CTF could also be a possibility.
Commissioner Gossett, I cut you off.
Just a question here with regards, I thoroughly support a sidewalk on that continual block there. Is there any prohibition, since we own the streets, that we take over a couple of feet of that street and narrow the street? That would be a traffic calming device, if you will, and put sidewalk on the outside of the poles.
Right, and there is parking on that side of the street as well. So that could be something that we look at, is we would, eliminate the parking and possibly locate the sidewalk a little bit further into the street.
And while we haven't adopted the new tree code yet, I think part of that in there indicates that we would, or maybe it was one of your analyses, that we would start looking at these projects from a new perspective, and that is to add trees to streets, and possible bump outs and things like that.
Well, Mayor, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was just about to ask. I'm much in favor of pushing this forward with the potential for the continuation of the sidewalk, but I would think not only trees, but potential for maybe a stormwater runoff kind of pilot. I don't know what we might need in there from an engineering standpoint, but to me, it all collides together as an opportunity, depending on how much this costs and how we're going to fund it.
Right. Yeah. That was my question. We also, I think we had 50,000 in the CIP from last year's budget. Is that been spent elsewhere or disappeared, or is that
I
still
believe
hanging
that was
around?
just for design.
That was for the construction
That
as
was
well.
for construction.
Correct, so.
Construction and design, or?
Yeah.
Okay. And just curious, the question back, now I have to go back to it, but on the scope there, the illustration you had with the yellow highlights, in the lower left-hand corner, there's kind of a little bump out down there. What exactly is that? It looks like a landing pad of some sort, I don't know.
Here?
Yes.
That would be replacing the driveway apron for that home, because it would be destroyed during the curb alignment.
And was there ever any consideration in turning this into a four-way stop as opposed to just a two-way stop?
No.
Is that something that DelDOT would have to approve?
Yes.
And is that based on traffic count?
That I don't know what would be their deciding factor on whether to make it a four-way stop.
Because we did change Second Street and Maryland to a four-way stop when we redid the streetscape there. So I'm just curious as if, again, pedestrian safety, this was one of the reasons you're putting up those flashing lights, and I think the flashing lights certainly help, but I think a stop sign would certainly be a better answer if we can do that.
Well, didn't you say earlier, or did I mishear, that DelDOT has to be a partner in this from a review standpoint?
That's correct. They would have to permit
So-
whatever we design.
So could they be consulted to get an opinion of whether or not a four-way stop would be the right thing to do at this juncture? And just do it all together, or not, or understand why not?
Certainly we could.
Okay, I'm just trying to get we're going to do that.
I'm to the point of, when do we get to the drop dead of good ideas, right? We worked on this. We presented the concept 2 years ago. We did the traffic study. We kind of agreed to it. We did the design for it. Now we're ready to go to construction or go to procurement. And now we want to add a sidewalk. Now we want to add a four-way stop. So if we're willing to say we're not going to do this now, we're going to go back and revisit the project, great, we'll be happy to do that. But if the intent is to move forward and get the crosswalk built in this budget year, which we budgeted for, then I would say we move forward. Kevin
My
Williams.
suggestion would be that we do this in phases and approve or consensus on this movement, what is presented to us today, but with phase two, investigating a four-way stop and also adding sidewalks to the distance discussed here, and perhaps including rain garden or some type of gray water management system along the sidewalks.
So if I could just say, you'll see in that sketch, there is a stormwater inlet because we do have ponding at that corner now. So that'll get that into the distribution system, the collection system and distribution. So we'll get that out of the way. You'll see the sidewalk is designed to go ahead down toward the Circle and 6th Street. So the layout is done to facilitate, if you did want to do a phase two and add the sidewalk next year, then it gives us time to coordinate with Delmarva to get poles, get the easements for those, get those relocated, and then build it out accordingly. I mean, we can wait certainly and do it all at one project if you want to wait, but
I don't think anybody's
these guys have been-
suggesting, excuse me, I don't think anybody's suggesting that we wait. And I think good ideas are just that. They're always good ideas. And phasing them in to a project that's already kind of got some legs under it, I think is the right way to go. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So with all due respect, I don't think we're trying to delay. Let me speak for myself. I'm not trying to delay anything. I just think we've got some opportunities in front of us that we shouldn't let get by us, but not to delay this initial part. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you.
If there's no other comments,
I have some questions, actually, a couple questions, if that's
okay.
okay.
go
I'm trying to
ahead.
understand.
And then I'm
the
going to
timing.
come to the members of the public. Go ahead.
I'm trying to understand the timing, because this was in the capital budget, not this budget year, but the previous budget year. And is it not gone out for bid yet? Is that the next step, or what?
that's correct.
So it's not going to get done this fall?
It'll get done this off-season.
It
Yes,
would,
ma'am.
it would get done, it would get done before next May, okay, because I was at the Country Club homeowners meeting. The meeting is always the weekend after Labor Day. So last year I went to the meeting where this was a big topic of discussion, and I told everybody that it was going to be done this year. And here we go, so I didn't realize that it was, the last I heard is DelDOT had approved the plan and it was moving forward. So I'm pleased to know that it will get in this budget year, but that means it's going to be done over the winter, I guess, right?
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Well, I'll be going to the Country Club Estates
You
property
tell
owners, and I will tell them that unlike what Commissioner Gay said last year, it will be done this year.
So just a clarification, that means it's going to be done in 22 or 23?
It'll be done before Memorial Day 2023.
Yeah, that's what I thought I heard you
Right.
kind of allude to. This is a 2023 completion.
Correct. It's in FY 2023. Correct.
So let's go to the members of the public. Is there anybody who would like to comment specifically on this topic? Please state your name and your relationship to the city.
Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident. I go through that intersection probably multiple times a day on my bike, so this is needed. And phasing, I think, is fine, but I think this part needs to get done this year, because it is a dangerous intersection. Thanks.
Thank you, Carolyn. Commissioner LeGree?
I go through the same intersection every day, just like,
Microphone.
just like Citizen Diefendorfer. I go, it's very dangerous. And am I understanding that that is the plan that you have shown here, where we are now?
Yes.
With those bump outs and everything that's like that?
Correct.
Let's go forward.
But just to put a fine point on it, this is not going to get done this year, 2022. It's going to be done in 2023.
It's our fiscal, Commissioner, it's our fiscal year 23, which runs until the end of March in 23. So when I say it's going to get done this year, it's going to get done before the next season. So before next Memorial Day, it's our intent to have this constructed.
Right, but for our residents don't, I'm with you, but it's going to get done in calendar year 2023.
I can't say that because we may very well get it done this fall.
Am I the only one that's hearing two different things?
It's going to be done before Memorial Day next year.
Yeah,
FY
between
2023.
October 22 and April 23,
Okay,
we intend to construct this.
okay.
All right, thank you. So I'm not hearing any objections. We'll direct the city manager and Kevin to go forward with this, understanding that there may be a phase 2 and 3 opportunities in the future.
And
Thank you.
we'll start working that way. Obviously, our designer is thinking that way as well, the way he's got the sidewalk laid out. So we'll continue with that as a phase 2.
Correct. Thank you very much. With that, we'll go to the next item of business. Now we're going to start at, over again at old business number A, call for commission, board, committee, and memberships. We've already had a press release out. Hope to get another one out. Call solicitation for members. We love community members coming forward and serving on our committees, commissions, and boards. Some have more authority, some are advisory. But the point of this today is just to remind everybody, there is a deadline, September 22nd. That's merely to be considered for this next round. You can fill out applications year-round. Such that if any vacancies come forward, then we can seek you out. Members are needed right at this moment for the Board of Adjustment, Parks and Shade Tree Commission, Planning Commission, I believe Street and Transportation, Environment Committee, Trees and Green Infrastructure, I think, Susan, don't we? Yeah, and so again, apply now for any of these committees that you would like to be on.
Mayor, also animal issues.
And animal issues, got you down. Very good, thank you very much. With that, we're going to move on to the next item, old business B, identify parking issues, prioritize, make assignments, and set timelines to address. The goal here is not so much to discuss individual items in depth, but more to look at what we have identified. If you recall, I put out a solicitation to the commissioners and the public to submit your parking issues to Evan. Evan has received those and has organized them. Now I'd like us to look at them with respect to, do we want to cross any off our list to make the list shorter? Or do we want to make assignments for them? In other words, would they go to parking staff? Would they go to Street and Transportation Committee? Would they come directly to the Board of Commissioners? So with that, we'll turn it over to Evan.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mayor. So if you want, Mayor, what I could do is probably go through each one of these topics individually, give a little bit of background information. I think that might be helpful, sort of how they were put on the list, how they came up. So the first one, 92-249, unattended motor vehicles. You recall this was an ordinance that we had actually brought before you all last year and was left unresolved. This deals with a code provision that allows for vehicles to be towed from in front of a private property if the private property owner calls and asks that it be removed after 48 hours. The discussion that we had was perhaps allowing individuals who have purchased a weekly permit to be able to park on the street for up to 8 days before there's a fear of them being towed or the ability for a private property owner to tow that particular vehicle. Item number 2 is the Parking Advisory Committee 2018 recommendations. I know this was mentioned at the last meeting, so included in those recommendations, I listed just a couple of them, but the parking season, this is something that is discussed every single year. We like to try and plan ahead and start the discussion if there is any interest to change the parking season. I know we just recently made the change from the Friday before Memorial Day through the second Sunday after Labor Day to May 15 to September 15th. I think the parking committee had mentioned May 1st through September 30th. So again, just putting it back out there if there was any interest in discussing the parking season. Certainly parking meter and parking permit rates, time limits. We've looked at time limits over the last couple of years, making changes, and then also the issuance of parking permits. Also 30-minute parking, so the locations, the quantity, and how to possibly better identify those 30-minute parking spaces. So those are all included within the Parking Advisory Committee's recommendations, but certainly there are other things that are included within those recommendations. I did prepare, as a request at the last meeting, I did prepare a spreadsheet which basically includes all of the 2018 recommendations and then any action that was taken on those back then or since as of basically today's date. Grove Park parking lot. I know there was some discussion that I had with the chamber about possibly looking at increasing that time limit. You'll recall that Grove Park right now is the only lot or the only location of parking meters where there is a 3-hour time limit. So that was mentioned. Certainly from the last meeting, we had Fire Chief Chuck Snyder's request to address the emergency response challenges that are caused by just general congestion, delivery vehicles, buses, things like that. Any initiatives for downtown business employee parking? I know this is brought up. I hear about it over the course of the summer as well. So I didn't know if there was any interest in pursuing any particular initiatives. You'll recall we did work with the chamber a couple of years ago, and we're ready to implement an employee parking program at the elementary school. Didn't gain too much traction. There wasn't a whole lot of interest in that program, so that has sort of since dissolved. Parking space requests that are received from various organizations, including the Public Library, Cape Henlopen Senior Center, Chamber of Commerce Visitor Center, Historical Society, and Main Street. So this goes back to dedicated parking spaces. We have a few dedicated spaces in Martin's Lawn for the Visitor Center. I know that the Historical Society receives parking placards that they put on their dash for employees or for visitors. Main Street, I believe they have 2 placards as well. Also put on there the Cape Henlopen Senior Center. This has been a challenge for probably the last 3 years. It goes back to when the city transitioned from pay by space to pay by license plate. So back, I think it was 3 years ago, the senior center used to use a parking permit system. So they created parking permits and they distributed parking permits to visitors of the senior center. When we implemented the license plate recognition program, we did away with the senior center parking permits so that we could be more efficient with our enforcement. So the enforcement officers didn't have to get out of the vehicle and go to check for a placard on the dash. So what we ended up doing was designating parking spaces on Christian Street. We had 20 designated spaces for the senior center during the days and hours that they were in operation. We, at least this summer, had received some concerns from the senior center about not only 20 spaces not being enough, but also concerns of seniors getting up onto the sidewalk off of Christian Street. Some of them had fallen and injured themselves. So one of the things we recently had done was moved some of the dedicated spaces into the Martin's Lawn parking lot. I think traditionally from what we've heard, Christian Street seems to be the most popular location to park. So we took the signage off of Christian Street and moved them into Martin's Lawn to provide that accessibility to the building for those visitors. So that's a brief background on that. I can certainly answer any questions you have. We have seen item 7. We've seen a large increase in private intracity transit shuttles, sort of designating them as low-speed vehicles according to the Delaware DMV. These are things that appear to be like golf carts. So there is a proliferation of these, and currently we do not have anything in our code that addresses licensing, designated drop-off zones, etc. So wanted to put that all before you. And then finally was brought up by, I believe, Commissioner Legree and Commissioner Gay, was taking a look at 27035, which is minimum parking spaces required. So exceptions, so the number of parking spaces required for particular uses and the exclusion currently of a category for all other uses. I know that was a lot all at once, so I can answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Evan. I guess I'd like to start here. Whoa. Again, the timing of these is important. Now that we've identified these things, we need to move forward with some rapidity. Why? Because we've got a city parking and walking guide that needs to be published by the city, and we need to have the content by when? Do you know?
Parking walking guide, we begin editing in February, and then the delivery deadline is the last week of March. So usually around February, we begin discussing edits.
So February-ish, we need to have content. We also have put stuff on the web, which is maybe a little more forgiving, right? The Chamber of Commerce has their brochure, and Carol, I already forgot what you told me.
December, I believe December is.
December.
Yeah.
December, okay. So again, even that is generous because she leaves some blanks there, and then at the last minute, we fill them in. And so we've got some time constraints there. Again, what this exercise is for me is to be able to identify the topics, decide whether or not we want to pursue them. I'm not talking about the merits of individual, talking about in-depth right now, but whether we want to pursue them or not, or cross them off our list, and then how to organize and make assignments and defer on the timeline. You know, for these 8, in my own little list, this is the unattended motor thing. We commissioners tried addressing that, I think, multiple times last year, and we did not get anywhere with it. So I'm content either dropping it or handing it over to the Street Transportation Committee.
Well, Mayor, just for me, I look at all of these, especially number 1, with the eye of how many complaints do we actually get about this? And I can honestly say for me, in 7 years of being a commissioner, I've never gotten this complaint one time personally. So if I'm trying to prioritize, I'm trying to figure out which ones of these have the most energy around them from a negative situation, or possibly people have intelligence on whether or not some of these are so much more important than others. That's why.
Well, then let's approach them one at a time, if you could, using that philosophy. Because again, I think I would like to see us cull some of these and focus on what's the most important. So what I'm hearing from Tony, and I don't disagree, is that number 1 is to just be left alone. And one of the rationalizations is there's not enough complaint about it. Got to remember, the property owner can complain about long-term parking in front of their house and have a vehicle ticketed and towed. So as long as we leave that in place, and who better than the owner, and I've been there too myself on the 2nd block of Maryland Avenue, who better than the owner to monitor how long somebody's been there?
Right.
So does anybody want to keep that on, or? Sounds like not, so let's cross number 1 off. Number 2, Parking Advisory Committee, you know, they have a PowerPoint, lengthy PowerPoint, and we did not adhere to a lot of their recommendations, if you recall. So the standards on there are the parking season, parking meter permits. Do we want to even pursue that this year, or have a buy for passing on it this year?
I just have one question about it, and we just made the change, as I think was already mentioned, for this past season. Do we have any feedback on, did that cause any problems? Did it get a great deal of compliments? I mean, do we know enough about what happened in year 1 to tinker around any further?
So I would say probably the biggest challenge, I think, was because May 15th was before, the Friday before Memorial Day, we had a couple folks, at least that I received a couple complaints about folks who had not paid the meter because they didn't think it had started yet. Now that is not uncommon for any year, even before we changed the season. I would think probably the biggest positive comment was that now it's a lot easier for folks to remember. It's a lot less information to communicate via parking walking guide, website, information on the meter, on stickers, on signage, things like that. But I would say probably the only complaint I personally had heard was, again, starting a little bit earlier. Folks just weren't used to it yet for the first summer, so.
And let me just interject there in there because you're asking about, have we gotten any reports? If you recall, everybody's asked for end-of-year reports. And I just want to reiterate that likely at the October workshop, maybe the regular meeting, but in October, we will be addressing those. And by recollection, the Rehoboth Beach Patrol would have a report. The police department would have a report specific to noise and anything else. Streets could give a report on recycling. Parking. So we'll delve a little more deeper into that. So, so as far as number 2, I'm not thinking that there's any need to
I would
address
be
it.
in favor of revisiting it because we have millions of dollars of infrastructure coming our way that I don't think we should be taxing our residents for, or at least for all of it. So I think we should look at the parking season, the length, and the cost. I think that should be an agenda item sometime in the future.
So 2A and 2B.
Yes.
And 2C we'll leave to,
Well, 2C, I also think that after 4 p.m. or 5 p.m., we should make those full parking spots for people. We have far too many 30-minute spots, I think, that could be used for evening parking for people that are going to restaurants or supporting the businesses.
well, I'm not sure I agree, but why don't we put that on too then?
Yeah.
Mayor, the,
Commissioner Legree, go ahead.
the Boardwalk and Beach Committee talked at our last meeting about the time of the season for bikes, for dogs, for parking, for beach patrol hour. We wish that there would be some way we could get everything more standardized than what it is now. Their biggest complaint was the parking days, but.
We've been through that before, but unsuccessfully.
Yes, we did. But we didn't solve they're still all jumbled around. I'm not sure there's an answer. I'm not sure
I think we didn't solve it because there was no resolution. The people wanted this and this and this and this.
That's what happened.
All righty.
I just have a comment about the committee recommendations, because I realize this past season seems to have worked pretty well with the change that was made. But the best part about, first of all, the committee spent several years and a lot of hard work coming up with those recommendations, which were largely ignored at the time, and it's been 4 years. But the primary value in their report was the interrelationship between all of the elements. And the fact that if you change one, if you change a time, if you change a price in one area, how it affects others. So I do think you ought to revisit it holistically, because in the interim, some changes have been made and some haven't, and it sort of speaks to what they were trying to get at, but we never really finished the process. So I hope you don't drop that one.
Well, it was very clear to me that there was non-committal to the Street and Transportation or Parking Committee recommendation. So I hear you, but I don't know that there's going to be receptivity up here.
Okay. Mayor, if I could make 2 comments. One is that I agree that we should take a stronger look at the August 17th, 2018 parking study, and if that could be brought to a little refresher on the city website so citizens can review it. Kind of, it's there, but it's a little difficult to dig down into the layers. So I think it should, if we could make it more quickly available on the website so people could read it. And I would also suggest, as part of the budgeting process, that we look at an outside consultant for a comprehensive parking study. We've been kicking this can around since 2018 and previous to that, and kind of cherry picking what we like and what we don't like and what have you. But I know that Evan has been working diligently on the parking systems over the past 3 to 5 years, and there is all kinds of new software and so much stuff out there that meets the needs of college campuses, of universities, of hospitals, which we are in a parallel looking at that of usage seasonality, this type of thing. And, you know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here, but we need to steal other people's ideas. And I think that a comprehensive parking study as part of the budget to look at this would be more beneficial than us. I mean, all of us up here have a knowledge of what's going on, but what we don't have is the knowledge of how to solve those problems in a more modern way. I mean, you go to other communities and you can get a parking permit online. And, you know, everything's moving more and more towards smartphones and that availability. And I just don't think collectively up here we have the knowledge to investigate that, but we have the problems. So looking at a consultant, and that gives us somebody to blame too if it doesn't work out. But, you know, I just think that would be the next step to go to.
Yeah. And Commissioner, I appreciate you bringing that up too, because one of the things that we are looking at this year is actually included in the budget is a parking study, but not necessarily technology, implementation strategies, things like that, mostly for an inventory of our parking system in town. So we have fire lanes, loading zones, 30-minute spaces, metered spaces, permitted spaces, and I know that Linda had prepared a report years ago, and it estimated the number of metered parking spaces, but the challenge is the permitted parking spaces, roughly how many are there. So we are working right now with a consultant to better inventory, specifically through GIS, our parking infrastructure and our parking system, which I think will help inform us moving forward with technology and improvements that can be made.
When would Rossi have a report? Before the end of the year?
Yes, before the end of the calendar year. They were actually on site this summer to get a better sense of congestion, things like that, but to really inventory. Again, we have seasonal signage and things like that they can help locate and track, record all of that stuff in GIS. So they were doing a lot of data collection this summer, so I would expect a report within a month or two.
But I hear Commissioner Gossett suggesting something different.
He is, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Just want to make sure I'm tracking.
Yep.
So would that be included in our budget discussions, if you
Yes.
can bring that forward?
Sure.
Thank you.
We have to consider that would be looking a year ahead, unfortunately, because
Well, we've been looking at it for 5 years, so one more year isn't going to make much difference.
I just want to make sure nobody thinks that it's going to happen in the next 2 months.
We never work that quickly. Come on.
The Grove Park parking lot, I think we're all interested in talking about that. Fire chief, number 4, fire chief's request. Is that something that we want to tackle, or task the police, Public Works, and city manager with?
I guess I'm trying to figure out, Commissioner Gossett, is your recommendation for a parking study, would it not include number 4?
Again, I believe it would, but I don't know that we don't know what we don't know type of thing. And that would be what a consultant could come in. And again, I don't think these are unique problems to Rehoboth Beach. I think that if we have someone or a consultant that has dealt with other seasonal communities, whether it's winter resort, summer resort, what have you, these are issues that exist, but that's how to look at this in a comprehensive manner.
Well, and I completely agree with you. So what I'm trying to figure out is the shortest route between point A and point B. To me, after listening to this partial discussion here, is a parking study. If it encompassed everything that's honestly on this sheet here. Because if we continue to try to tinker around with things while a parking study is in progress that could have a very significant outcome in a prescribed time frame, it doesn't go on forever, because this is not brain surgery, it's parking. To me, I'm not sure what's left for us to do if we actually go in the direction of a proper parking study.
Yeah, I don't disagree, Commissioner Sharp, but I do think that there are some things in here that we need to prioritize before the parking study would come forward, and that would be Actually, for me, number 5 would just be crossed off. We haven't been able to resolve that. But number 6, I think the city manager wants us to talk about that and resolve it before next, give him input before next summer season. The private intercity transit shuttles, I think he would like to resolve that before next parking season. And then minimum parking space, more that's Jay, more your thing there, and Susan too.
Well,
because your chart is included as a support document.
Just leave that as a parting
But
gift.
that's a broad parting gift. Thank
Parting
you, thank you. So,
So Mayor, just on number 6, these requests, are they new or is this the status quo?
This has been something that I think has been compounding over the last couple of years. And generally, it's been handled administratively. And I think with what has come forth in regards to requests and changes, I think it's appropriate for the commissioners to at least be aware of it and discuss what the Board of Commissioners are willing to do for these different organizations that have requested parking, dedicated parking spaces.
But what I'm trying to ask is, do they have any of these dedicated parking spaces now?
Yes.
Some
Oh, yeah.
of them do.
oh yeah,
Yes.
some a lot.
So is this an expansion of those or just the status quo?
Just, this is simply would just be an update, and what I can do is I can prepare a support document which outlines how many dedicated parking spaces they have, where they're located, and present that to you all for discussion.
Okay.
Maybe it's just an awareness of what is going on, and then you say, okay, we're fine with it, or,
What I'm hearing you say is administratively,
Yes.
we've already approved these things.
Yep.
And we're doing it annually. That's the key for me. Thank you.
But part of the problem is constituents and business owners have been approaching us and saying, how can you give away all these free parking spaces when you're taking them away from my patronage, my patrons, and my employees and all that? So Evan believes that this is the time to start addressing that, especially number 1, so that everybody here has an awareness, and then seeking any resolutions.
Thank you.
And I notice you have some here start as time sensitive, and I just want to add with that, you know, I do think it's critical to be looking at 270-35, and I know Jay really wants to do that, but I think that is time sensitive in the sense that we've got a lot of development going on, and as you will see from the chart that I did that's attached to the agenda, our parking requirements, I think, are woefully inadequate, outdated at this point, and less than any other municipality. But the advantage is, I mean, I don't know that it can be solved in one meeting, but at the same time, once introduced, it's subject to the pending ordinance doctrine, right, Glenn? So, but just by introducing it, you will bring about some change for the future. So I would encourage you to do that.
Susan, let me review a few. Number 5, initiatives for downtown business pulling. I haven't heard anything from anybody, so I just as soon drop that. Number 6, we just talked about needs to come in front of the commissioners, so we'll do that. Number 7, I would suggest that we send this to the Street and Transportation Committee for their first blush and look at this. Number 8, I wonder if that might be another task for the Planning Commission. You know, they're hurting for things to do right now. But seriously, because that's it's within the zoning code.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, then by all means.
Would you be amenable to that?
I would love that.
Okay, that's one fewer thing for us to do. So,
Mayor, if I could also
Yeah.
add to the list here, one that comes to mind with, in conjunction possibly with number 6, and Evan producing some hard data, the number of spaces. You know, we also issue a parking permit with every business license that is issued. And there is the inconsistency of a seasonal permit costs what right now?
$275.
$275, but you could get a business license for $60 for a dog walker, and you get a parking permit. So that's out there. Everybody go get a dog walking permit and get a free parking permit. But I think those kinds of inconsistencies, again, is something that a comprehensive look by a consultant can help us solve these things. Because many of these were done, very righteously done, based on one set of information, and all have just kind of dominoed over the years, and there's, that I'm aware of, not been a comprehensive look at how do these all work together and if they should or shouldn't, what have you. So, you know, and people think because they have a parking permit, that they bought a parking permit, they got a space to park in. That's not always the case. So again, setting expectations and looking at how we communicate this to our citizens, our visitors, and what have you. Again, I just don't think, me specifically, there's not the brain power here to solve this. But it is something that is done commonly throughout the world, to be honest with you.
Very good. I would like to add something about the bus drop-off and parking. Maybe that's something that we can get a report on at the end of the year report on, is that working? I had 2 Greyhound buses pull in front of my house over the weekend and dropped off kids with backpacks and whatever. And then to get out of that area, rather than going up to Columbia and making a U-turn, they did a U-turn right at Cookman and 3rd, and it took about 10 times going back and forth, you know? And I'm just curious whether they didn't have access to the parking lot out here, whether it was full, whether the president's trucks were in the way, whatever. But maybe the end of the year report will help shed some light on that. Did you have, so we've made some progress here on some things that will be deleted, sent to Street and Transportation, and some additional addendums there. Did you want to go over anything else? Was there anything else to identify?
No, I don't think so, Mayor. I mean, certainly internally, the staff has our own list, which is pretty substantial. So there will be other things that come before you all once we're prepared to present that to you, so.
Very good. Anybody else before we go to the public? Again, the purpose of this exercise is not necessarily comment on individual items, except with respect to should they be on a future agenda or not, and who they should be assigned to. Any members of the public like to offer anything? No? Oh, Carol, go ahead. Carol Everhart, identify yourself and your relationship to the city, please.
Carol Everhart, Rehoboth Beach, Dewey Beach Chamber of Commerce. Just to make sure that the timeline, that you're all aware, I can hold pages in the visitor guide, which goes to the printer early December. But if I know, hold 2 pages, we can do that, and I can actually get the information early December. Once it goes, it's too late to get anything in there. And you're looking at 140,000 copies. So the other thing is I'm going to harp on consistency and simplicity again, because the one thing that I've seen over the years is this past year when you did the May 15 to September 15, I didn't get one complaint. I didn't get one. That is really shows you what happens when I know they may not have been aware and have told the city, oh, it started earlier. But once they were here, I just did not get the complaints as I did in the past. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that. I'm not saying whatever you do, the more consistent it is and the more simplistic it is. Your visitors, some of them come year after year and some of them have never been here, and it's about half and half now from everything we can tell. That's it.
Thank you, Carol. With that, I want to give myself a brief pause. I'd like to go to new business A, discuss city commitment to continue management of and funding of July fireworks activity. Evan?
Thank you, Mayor. So actually this year was the expiration of the fireworks agreement that we had with Zambelli. So moving forward, we've received a proposal from Zambelli. We've also received a proposal from Sky Shooter Displays, which I believe they have worked with Bethany Beach. So those are 2 groups that have provided us with proposals for fireworks displays. You'll recall, and this predates me, so I apologize if I get some information incorrect, but I believe there was an agreement through Main Street to have them assist in fundraising for the fireworks every single year. So the original agreement was signed in 2019, and that covered 2019 fireworks, 2020 fireworks, and 2021 fireworks. There was not a show in 2020, so there was a show in 2019, 21, and 22. So I had spoken with Dan Slagle at Main Street. He does not recall or didn't have any information he could share with me regarding a fireworks fund that Main Street has. What I take from that is now that the agreement has expired and Main Street no longer has a fireworks fundraising fund or account, that the city would take on the fireworks moving forward. So wanted to bring this all before you. The proposals that we have are actually very similar in price to the previous agreement we had with Zambelli. The previous agreement with Zambelli was $34,000 for the 3 years. The proposal we received from Zambelli moving forward is the 2023 would be $35,000, 2024 would be $35,750, and 2025 would be $36,500. The proposal we have from Sky Shooter Displays is just for 2023 in the amount of $32,000. And certainly this can become part of the budget discussions, yet in order to execute an agreement with Zambelli, at least for Zambelli in particular, they would need an executed agreement by December. So wanted to bring this before you all.
So Evan, the proposals that we've gotten, were those unsolicited?
Yeah, so well, we actually reached out to Zambelli and asked them for a proposal moving forward, and then I believe Sky Shooter Displays had actually sent us a message on Facebook saying that they were interested in putting in a proposal, so we received one from them. But we have not done any formal RFP or anything like that.
And I don't know if you have the answer to this, but do we know how long we've been, or the city has, or Zambelli has been doing fireworks in the city?
I don't.
But they've been basically the only contractor we've used?
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, so was Main Street, did they originally help with funding?
That was my understanding.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The head of Main Street back then took it on and they collected money. And years ago, I think, well, we don't need to have a history. I agree that, were there any unknown, any hiccups behind the scenes that we should be aware of?
No, I mean, they're great to work with. We usually coordinate with them, well in advance, hold a pre-meeting just to go over some of the logistics. I mean, one of the challenges we had this year, not much of a challenge, was that you'll recall the fire marshal had us move the fireworks a little bit more south. But they were able to stage basically in the same location, and I'm not aware of any serious issues we had this year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So is this a contract that needs to go out to bid?
It's under 50.
Yeah, well, it's under.
It's under 50,000.
Under 50.
Yeah, and it's in the nature of professional services in that not many people do this kind of a fireworks display, so I don't think it would need to go to bid.
So are you asking if we choose to, we could re-up with Zambelli?
Yes.
One of your questions is, do we want to continue doing it?
Right.
Do we want to be the one to fund it?
Yep.
And then our philosophy on bidding out or using, sticking with Zambelli, right? Any further comments?
Yeah, my only other question would be, and I don't know, Evan, if this is a fair question, but I'd be curious as to what the fireworks cost us as a whole. In other words, all the additional police, the buses that are running up and down the streets. I mean, it's a pretty big event. I mean, is fireworks really cost us $150,000?
So I know I had reported on that at one of our previous meetings, so
I've got that if you want.
Okay, sure.
Total cost is about $57,875, and that breaks out. Zambelli was $34,000. The meal for our workers is $6,150. Porta potties, $5,725, and the cost of personnel is $12,000. So it comes up to about $57,875. So overhead cost, if you will, is about $24,000. Fireworks itself was $34,000, and it would be, as Evan said, $35,000, and then $35,700, $36,000. I mean, I think if my recommendation, I know we can't take a vote here, but consensus, I would think to stay with Zambelli. They're the ones, they're familiar with how it works here with the beach, and, you know, a couple of years we had to go with a barge because there was less beach, and just the working environment that has established between the police department and public works and all of that. You know, I don't know that it's worth $2,000, to be honest with you, to try to reestablish all those relationships, and what's going on kind of goes back in my mind. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I would be interested to know, though, if there's any update or comments from the business community as they feel fireworks is really beneficial to the city in that regards. And also, you know, we've at times done it on the 4th of July, and other times we've done it on Sunday. Maybe that's why we get a better price from Zambelli on Sundays as opposed to the 4th. Again, I don't know if that data exists or if it would even have an impact on any decision we make, but I think that, again, my thought would be to stick with Zambelli and go forward with that, just because of a history with them, and we've not really had any problems, as Evan has commented.
And Mayor, one of your first questions was, should we keep doing it? And I would lobby very hard that this is an iconic, nostalgic event here in Rehoboth, that I would not want to be part of taking it away.
Carol, can I pose on you? You can just sit there and nod your head, yes or no. Have you heard any overwhelming response from businesses that it hurts business, that it's not of value? I mean, if you're going to speak, come on.
That's not a yes or no answer, I don't think.
Trying to save you.
Carol Everhart, Rehoboth Dewey Chamber. It really does depend on the business. You will have occasionally a business that complains because they did better the day before, for whatever reason. But overall and overwhelmingly, the business community does support the fireworks, as do the visitors. And we've noticed that now it's not only on the 4th. You used to have it on the 4th. It caused a traffic problem, so it was moved to not the 4th. And I think that is also something that brings them in on a day that they wouldn't normally be there. So I think it's very well received. It's a lot of visitation at one time. In and out is a problem, but I can't say that they wouldn't. I think the business community wants to see the fireworks, and I believe that the visitor does too, from everything I know.
Thank you, Carol. I'm for maintaining the formula we have now, continuing to fund it, continuing to use Zambelli. The price spread was very narrow, and I think Zambelli being a known entity, it's worth sticking with them. Anybody else? Any further comments from the public?
We have a commercial team on the Boardwalk and Beach Committee who have established communication with most of the businesses. This is a question that might be well asked of those people. So I'll see if they want to do that and give you a response down the line if you'd like.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll go to the next item of business, which is old business. Discuss fee structure and policy objectives for issuance of license agreements authorizing encroachment of a structure in the city right-of-way. We kind of got a little lesson this morning when we had the Presbytery here for the license agreement. Glenn started off with explaining the difference between a license agreement and a lease, city property, city rights-of-way. Again, this is a broader topic that I've found the need for many, many years to address because I've found that there is minimal consistency in the language used for the license agreements, minimal consistency in the fee structure, including the formula and the amount, and there are missing license agreements that we need to address. Forget your euphemism, Commissioner Sharp. It was much more pleasant than missing or And then even terminations, the inconsistency in that. In terminations, and that is where the city writes into the license agreement, you have so many days as a license holder to remove the encroachment. We've got one that ends with 120 days, one that ends in 90 days, one that ends in 360, 60, and no note, and upon written notice. Again, no consistency. In terms of fees or formulas, as far back as 1980, I found a license agreement where it was proposed that the license agreement fee be based on $10 a square foot. And in my research, that apparently never gelled. And what happened is they used a $3.90 per square foot fee. Recently, in the last 3 years, we've had per square foot fees. That is for anywhere from square foot fees, 2 cents a square foot, 10 cents a square foot, $1 a square foot, $3.50 a square foot, and $3.90 a square foot. And I can't find any rhyme or reason for those formulas and fees. For flat fees, prior to that, flat fees of $0 a year, $1 a year, $10 a year, $20 a year, $40 a year, $100 a year. Again, without any formula having been established for those. And so what I'm looking to put this in front of you is to see if this is not a good time. I believe it's a good time to be addressing license agreements and fee structure. And I know Patrick has done research on this since 2018, and for whatever reason, we never got to it at that point. If you look at page 2 of my support document, I'm suggesting a 3-part fee structure. That initially we charge a non-refundable administrative fee of $325 to accompany the request for consideration of the license agreement. Would cover attorney's fees, and the process for the attorney is that he confers with the licensee, confers with code officials, creates it, reviews it, finalizes it. He's got a lot of time invested in this. And why it's non-refundable, because if the commissioners turned it down, we still want his fee to be taken care of. The second step would be an annual administrative fee of $30 as determined by City Manager Evan Miller based on what he thought labor needs, personnel needs were. $30 annual administrative fee for billing and tracking and doing what they do. And then above that, have an annual fee as compensation for use of city property. These are some options. They're all contained within support document. As far as addressing older encroachment, you could consider as little as no fee, $0 a year, because the $30 an annual billing fee would cover that adequately. For the newer encroachments, I'm trying to find a formula to use to determine what is that square footage. If you recall, Agave behind us here received a license agreement at $1 a square foot. I think 45 Lake was $1 a square foot. The dumpster pad over at Sandcastle was 2 cents a square foot. The medical place over on the Boardwalk is, I think, $3.90 a square foot. So again, there's lack of consistency there. So what kind of formula could we use? And I thought, aha, I've got it. Because they're using city property, then why wouldn't they pay us for the value of that city property per square foot? So I used my own land value of 600,000, divided it out, and it came up to about $100 was it $100 a square foot? Let me double check here. Came up $142 a square foot. So if I were to encroach on the city land, why wouldn't I try to pay $142 a square foot? Well, here's why. Based on the presbytery that was here this morning, 504 square feet, times, let's round it down to $100 a square foot. That means they'd be paying $50,000 a year. So you know what? That doesn't work. So I don't know whether you could still have a percentage, 10% of the land value per your last assessment, or are there other formulas? I don't know. But anyhow, here's a summary of the fee structures. I would like to open it up to the commissioners. And Patrick, maybe you want to start. Again, Patrick did a lot of research back in 2018 and started this process, and just for whatever reason, we weren't able to carry it through.
There wasn't an appetite to carry it through because it's a convoluted conversation at times, and you've picked up a lot of the suggestions that I had back at that point in time. I feel good that the $30 is based on an actual evaluation of overhead cost, which would be good. The other issue on this is just to be kind of lay it out a little bit. The property assessment, that's based, the city does not have an assessment on its property. So what you're talking about is, to use a word, maybe I'm making it up, but the encroachee is the one that we're using the property assessment, and it should be the assessed value. Now, assessment is broken into structure and land. So we want to look at the total value, the assessed value, not specific land or structure, but a total assessed value to base that on. And I think a percentage would probably work well in the sense that it is then adapted to each individual. As if you set a across-the-board fee, if I'm only encroaching on 3 feet and somebody else is encroaching on 50 feet, that's not a consistent application of it. But if you look at the appraised value or assessed value of your property and then use that as a percentage, 10%, or so that there's a formula that it is specific to the property that's being reviewed or is applying for an encroachment. I really think that's the best way to go. Now, we do assessed value right now. It's internal to the city because we do our own assessments, but the county is also doing a reassessment that we're also investigating in, is to, not to have duplicate systems. So again, based on research that I did back in 2018, I don't think anything's really changed, but to look at the assessed value of the property, using that as a formula, say 10%. Again, that's kind of coming out of the air, but I think it's a valid formula to use to apply equally over any encroachments that we have. The question I have, though, is about, I know we're talking about specifically license agreements, and we have the ability, because I know when the mayor and I worked on Lake Avenue streetscape, the first phase, and there were a number of licensed encroachments there that we had to recall because we were putting in sidewalks and what have you, and residents had encroachments into the sidewalk. So we do have the ability to end that encroachment when needed, or, that's my question of when earlier about writing a final date or how to best approach that.
Termination.
So that's right, Commissioner. There's, in most of the license agreements we've done over the past decade, there's a 90-day period where the city would need to give notice, and it's not an opportunity for the licensee to cure some defect. It's an actual notice of termination, and it's going to be terminated within 90 days. There's other provisions that if they violate the lease, there's opportunities for them to cure, but as they're currently drafted, we have a 90-day period. It could be something less than that. It could be something more, depending on what policy the commissioners would like to set, but that's how it's currently written.
And again, every time we mention most or whatever, I'm going to remind us that there's inconsistency. You say most have a termination date of 90, and that, I don't know where that comes from, but I've got some here at 90, 120, 360, immediate, et cetera. So again, I just want to re-emphasize that inconsistency here. You know, part of me says, I find it very appetizing that we would create a formula and try to do this and then test it to make sure it's applicable to everybody. Because the other alternative is just every time we have a license agreement, we make a determination there. And I don't know how fair that is. But one thing I had thought of is that, you know, especially when I came up with a $50,000 a year figure, you know, obviously that's way too high, but I do believe that the figure ought to be high enough that it does two things. Maybe it would be high enough to be an incentive to minimize the amount of the encroachment. Or number two, it might be an incentive to remove or avoid the encroachment altogether. You know, we saw an example today. Maybe we could be hard-nosed and say, move those to the front of the house. We could do that with a lot of them. A lot of them we can't because they're existing and they predated codes and they're there and they've been allowed to be there forever. But anyhow, I think there is value in to try to come up with a formula and to seek consistency. Patrick, you have anything you want to add before we go to the...
Just try to distinguish that we're talking about permits for encroachment. Now, the city also has leases that exist for buildings and properties. So these are two separate subjects, and sometimes they kind of get a little commingled. So just to keep the discussion at, this is permits to encroach, and there's a separate formula to that. Now, the city does own some buildings that they lease, such as the
Chamber of Commerce,
the Historical Society. We have a couple of commercial properties on Rehoboth Avenue. So this is completely different than that. And of course, I would think that lease discussion is something that should come up in the future, but this is just the permits to encroach. And as my research, we have like 21 or 22 of them in the city at the present time.
Correct. And again, our list is incomplete because we're missing some, but Ann is very diligently going back to those index cards we mentioned earlier and trying to do her best to come up with these and then identify ones that we need to go back and redo. And even cleaning up the language. There's one in here that says a license to encroach, et cetera, a lease. Here's one that says a lease. Here's one that says a license to lease property. So we've got to seek consistency in all our language, yeah.
So Mayor, could you educate me on one issue? This document in line 54 says that the city attorney's fee, because we have an attorney involved in each one of these, right? So I'm confused as to why we have all these inconsistencies. Is that our city solicitor, or can it be a whole host of different attorneys? I'm lost in how is this so convoluted and not consistent, and maybe that's not particularly germane for today, but I'm also trying to figure out why would we try to figure out a formula? Don't other communities do this? And don't people have formulas? Maybe we could find a community that's similar in our demographic and land values and figure that out?
Well, that would probably be a good next step if everybody's agreed to finding a formula, that we invest time in doing that.
So is that what you want today, that we are all in agreement that we need to look at these very thoughtfully and and determine next steps and move forward.
Exactly.
I'm all in favor of that because these things have bothered me for years. You know, looking at things where you're charging $1 and I don't, maybe that's acceptable but it's bothersome.
No, you hit the nail on the head. And I want to get Glenn off the hook. Remember, a lot of these license agreements go back decades.
Oh, I'm sure they
way
do.
Way before him. So, yeah, we can perhaps beat him up on some of the more current ones, but
Feel free to do that.
Mayor,
That's why I commented
but
probably.
not of the old ones.
Well, he sprang to my mind when we have this section here of newer encroachments. So it seems like at some juncture, if you've got the same person involved, or generally the same person involved, wouldn't you start to become more consistent?
So I would say probably within the past decade, there's a lot of consistency because there's a form that I start with. This isn't recreating the wheel every time. There's a form I start with. But I would also say that every document, every lease, every contract is a negotiated document. So the license is prepared, and there's a conversation between the applicant and you as a group of commissioners. And there's been a lot of different commissioners through the years. There's a few that have some real longevity, but you know, so every agreement will have some diversity in terms, but the document I start with is a standard license agreement that I've used for quite a while. So, but as the mayor said, some of these are 30, 40, 50 years
Of course, thank you.
But without, over the years, consistency in the language has gotten better. But up till now, we've avoided this formula. And so every price has been different, every annual fee, and I do think that Glenn threw in $1 a square foot during agave. I don't know where that came from, but so we had that thrown in, and then either that 45 Lake was $1 a square foot, and whether that preceded or followed agave, I don't know. But you started to get consistency there, different than years prior.
It'd probably be interesting to see the 45 Lake minutes because my recollection is that property was owned by Connie Malmberg, and I think he made a presentation to the commissioners as to why that was an appropriate fee, and the commissioners went with it. But I don't have any recollection as to exactly what it was either. And then when agave came, it was sort of, that's what was used at 45 Lake, and it got put into the agreement.
And it was not unanimous.
That's right.
And I guess a question here is, Glenn, your comment kind of troubles me when you talk about negotiating. That's why I think if we have a formula, that this is an administrative task. I honestly, again, encroachments versus lease, that we're talking encroachments, that really is administrative. And if we have a formula that is applied, the same thing as an assessment of your house, or you're building something, here's the formula that's going to cost you to get a building permit or something of that nature. I just, when you talk about negotiation, I kind of raise.
To be clear, the negotiations are between the applicant and you as the commissioners. I don't have any.
No, I understand that, but I don't, if we set a specific formula, then that takes the negotiation out of it. It's like, well, it's $1 a square foot. Well, I think it should be 50 cents a square foot. Well, I think it should be 75. Again, that negotiation part, I think, is what needs to be removed, and possibly that's why there are so many inconsistencies in past permits.
I'd push back a little bit on that.
I think a yes and a no to that. For instance, I think if we come up with a formula, that's the direction I'm headed for the square footage and all that stuff. However, where negotiation may come in is the client says, I want 12 feet across the entirety of my back. And maybe I say, I'm only willing to give you the utility shed. So there, I think there's the possibility of negotiating.
And can I add to that? I mean, if somebody said, I want to take a parking space from Rehoboth Avenue versus I want some area in Grove Park, I mean, I think the value of those two things are so enormously different that I'd have a hard time saying there's a one-size-fits-all formula.
Well, that was my question about, does the Board of Adjustment trigger some of these that we don't know? Because there was just recently a ruling where the Board of Adjustment agreed to allow a resident to encroach on the setback of Central Park. It was just a simple vote. because it was a new home build, but as I read this, that's an encroachment on city property then, right? So there probably should have been more than just, yes, you can do that.
Well, that particular case was not an encroachment on city property. It was an
Into the setback.
It encroached into the setback, right?
But is that still not considered, like, why do we have setbacks if we're not going to adhere to them?
Because that's the purview of the zoning board of adjustment.
That's why I'm wondering, does this trigger?
But still, it has nothing to do with triggering anything as far as license agreement until they cross that line into the right-of-way or city property. That
There's an interesting one now that may come before you at some point, where there's encroachment into the setback and into the city right-of-way. So they would need both a Board of Adjustment approval to encroach
Right.
their setback, and then a city commissioner's approval to encroach the right-of-way.
But it feels like to me we're way in the rabbit hole at the moment. Because, Mayor, what I thought you were trying to do is just get us to the point where we can move this to another point.
A formula, right?
Well, no, I don't think are we trying to solve it today?
No.
Okay.
We're trying to get a consensus to invest more time and move forward with it, seek what other towns might do in terms of formulas
Right.
and et cetera.
And I'll restate what I said 15 minutes ago. I'm all for it.
I'm all for it. 14 minutes ago.
14, thank you, Jay.
So if there's no more comments up here, I'd like to go to the members of the public. Is there anybody who would like to make a comment specific to this topic, which has to do with license agreements and policies and formulas? State your name and identify yourself, relationship to the city, please.
Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident. I agree you all need to be talking about this, but I do think there's a difference between a residential encroachment that has existed forever and a commercial encroachment. For example, the topic earlier, if they were permitted to build on the line, at the time, they did everything right. They got their agreement to be able to encroach, to go back and say, you can no longer use your steps out the back door, and you can no longer repair your leaking water connection. I think that's a very different thing than going forward. And I don't think I would hope that new residential encroachments are not possible. And you're always going to have some commercial ones, because if you want a business in, if they can build line to line, they may need to come out into the public space. So, but I do think there's a difference between a residential encroachment and a commercial encroachment.
Good point, and I don't disagree with you. One of the things why they have to come in front of us is make some determinations. I shared with you that I had a house on Maryland Avenue that part of the porch and part of the front steps were on city property, and it was allowed for 5 decades or something. And the license agreement, that was specifically to this outline of the porch and the stairs, not a big rectangle. So it was just specific to that area. And so that's where I think we have to make determination. Anyhow, I think there's a lot on our plate with this. I hope to move it forward. Is there any other comment up here? If not, we'll move forward with seeking to refine this and find out what other towns do. Thank you very much. With that, we're going to move to the next item of old business, which is review city codes related to construction and demolition, including but not limited to building code section 105.9, hours of construction, and chapter 105, demolitions. Evan's going to give a little talk on that. If you recall out of our previous discussions, Building and Licensing had explained their interpretation of demolitions. There was nothing real clear in our code. And so out of that conversation that happened to be focused on the demolition process for the sandcastle, I tasked Evan in Building and Licensing with taking a look at how to clear that up. And it has proved to be a difficult task so far. So they wanted to bring it in front of us to seek our opinions and give them guidance on how to move forward.
Thank you, Mayor. So as you indicated, sort of what we're hoping for today is just a discussion about the codes as they exist today, and then any input moving forward on how those codes should be amended. So you'll recall that construction can occur Monday through Friday between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., except for holidays, and that is May 1st through December 31st. Effective November 1st through April 30th, construction can occur during the same days and times, so Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., but they can also work on Saturdays from 9 to 5, again, except for holidays. The holidays included within the code where construction is prohibited is New Year's Day, Memorial Day, Independence Day, Labor Day, Thanksgiving Day, and Christmas Day. So wanted to put this topic before you all and see if there was any interest in changing any of those days or hours of construction limitations, and see, I know we had also had some brief conversations about the existing holidays. I don't believe there was any interest in adding additional holidays to the list. So just wanted to see if there was any desire to change the construction days and hours during the summer or in the off-season.
You know, I don't think I'm interested in any changes, but this is one of those things where constituents keep coming to me thinking that there is no construction allowed in the summer whatsoever. And certainly it indicates that there is Monday through Friday. It's Saturday and Sundays that are excluded. So in terms of hours, I don't see any need to make any changes, but that's why we're here to discuss it. Nobody? No, okay.
Evan, is this concurrent with state holidays?
So the state has additional holidays. So for example, the city's holiday list is a lot more substantial. So we include a good amount more holidays in terms of days off where the city offices are technically closed, but a majority of those holidays are not included in this.
But you
list
have
for
to make a
construction.
distinction of what holidays applications are. These are holidays with respect to hours of construction and work days. Then we have our separate list of holidays that affect when City Hall is closed.
Right.
And so you've got different circumstances there.
Yeah, the only question or suggestion that I would have with this, talk about inconsistencies or what have you, and I understand another list for staff holidays, if you will, or opening and closing public. But and again, it's wintertime, it probably doesn't happen at night, so I just throw this out there, but the Friday after Thanksgiving, that is not a prohibited holiday right now, according to our code. But you can also work on that Saturday after Thanksgiving. So, you know, is it just a one-day holiday? Does it make a difference to people? A lot of people are here with their families and relatives and what have you, and, you know, is that a quieter time, or do you want to, you know, jackhammer going off or whatever? I'd throw that out for consideration, that's all. If there's any, you know, appetite, yes, no, I don't really care one way or the other, but just throw it out since we're considering this.
We've been getting any complaints from any of the population about construction hours or construction time? I know we get complaints of construction hours based on builders starting before the allowed 8 a.m. time, but what we're talking about is based on Thanksgiving, the day after Thanksgiving, and the Saturday, and other dates that they would prefer people to not work.
Thanks, Mayor. Of course, you have your typical complaint that, you know, construction shouldn't be going on those occasions. A lot of that comes from renters and not necessarily property owners. So I think you'd have to take that into account as well. But the majority of complaints I do field in relation to hours working is during summer hours primarily. And they kind of quell down during the off-season hours, if you will.
Complaints of summer hours between 8 and 5.
Working during, yeah, a lot, as you stated, a lot of people think that no construction can happen between May and September.
Well, see, so the question is, to me, do they have legitimate complaints or not? If they're thinking that construction's not allowed their summer, and they're complaining because they're basing their complaints on that, it's not legitimate.
Right, the majority of complaints we have is noise, obviously, generators running, loud banging, things like that. Construction noises is what the majority of the complaints are.
I've had a couple of complaints about dumpsters banging early. But when you think about it, that's when you want it to happen. You hate to see a dumpster clog up the street for half a block and people start saying things that children shouldn't hear and things like that. So I think it's insolvable. You just something you have to deal with. But we hear it a lot in my.
So again, back to hours. Are there any further comments on hours? Members of the public, do you have any comments on construction hour? No, thank you. You want to go to topic 2?
Sure. The second topic was about demolition, how we define demolition for the purposes strictly of issuance of a demolition permit. So one of the questions is, when should a demolition permit be required by the city of Rehoboth Beach? So currently it's when an entire building or structure that is 750 square feet or larger and or has a connection to city water sewer line is being completely demolished, razed, and it's clearing the lot. We were hoping for some input on ideas in terms of how certain work would be construed as demolition moving forward. So if a portion of a structure is being demolished, would that then require a demolition permit? I think one important thing to note is that if it's a portion of a structure and we're looking at the entire structure being 750 square feet or larger, Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in instances in residential areas, if somebody's demolishing a porch or somebody is demolishing a garage, assuming that the house is larger than 750 square feet, that would then require a demolition permit. So just hoping for some input in terms of what the expectations might be, what those expectations are for issuance of a demolition permit moving forward.
This one, I've looked through a lot of other town definitions of demolition. You know, they have percentages, they have floor plan areas, they have this and that, and just a lot of them. And none of them were quite satisfying to me, especially because I was making them applicable to not just commercial, but residential.
Yeah.
And I think I've shared before, and I'm going to share again, that on my particular house, had severe, when I bought it, severe termite damage and whatever. It could not be restored. It had to be torn down. It literally took 2 days to tear it down and flatten out and to be able to start again. 2 days. And yet, because of the way my settlement was and timing, I was not able to do demolition in the period of time excluded here. And so what that meant ultimately is then therefore I couldn't start construction and I had the entire summer off. Now the bonus to my neighbor was that they didn't have to listen to not just the demolition, but construction. But again, construction would take place for months and months and months, well, a year. Demolition took 2 days, and yet we're excluding those 2 days. I don't know the solution, but you could compare that to commercial demolition that could take a month, I don't know, And that is a big deal, time-wise, dirt, noise, congestion, blocking sidewalks, thinking about these big projects coming in front of us, possibly by next year. So I don't have a good solution. I'm hoping somebody does.
Yeah, I mean, in some of the research we had done too, I think some of the challenges, interior demolition work, so like tenant fit out versus exterior demolition work. So in some of the examples I saw from other municipalities, interior work is basically classified under a building permit. And then any exterior demolition work is required, they're required to have a demolition permit.
So again, let's come back to some real life examples. Let's say we get rid of demolition altogether during the summertime. So you have somebody in a residence that applies for a building permit to remodel their kitchen, which requires demolition of the entirety of their kitchen down to the stud walls and joists and rebuilding it. So if that will fit in the definition of demolition, then we're not even allowing interior demolitions to happen. So that's where, to me, the definition of demolition has to perhaps exclude interior spaces, possibly.
I think another question that came to my mind was exterior, removal of one wall or two walls where it might be difficult to determine square footage. So if there's one wall that's being demolished, I mean, if you're looking at the code as, a portion of the structure is being demolished, the whole structure is 750 square feet or larger, the requirement for a building permit in that instance. So I think really just what we're bringing to your, awareness today is some of the questions that we had, and just wanted to entertain a discussion about it so we can prepare to make any changes moving forward.
So even 105.1 up there, demolition prohibited during certain periods based on, let me do those last two signs say, if it has a connection to the city water or sewer lines, it'll be prohibited. I suppose the reason for that could be that the city doesn't want anybody digging into the street across public sidewalks, digging up, making reparations in the summertime. But again, my frustration is that's a one-day project to do that. One day, and based on one day. So if you're smart, you make sure that you get that done and disconnected by May 14th. Otherwise, you can't do it. So again, I don't know the solution. I don't know where we want to go with this, whether we want to have him come up with one recommendation, 5 recommendation. Again, he is coming to us for guidance. Is there any members of the public who would like to offer the solution? I offer the solution. Go ahead.
Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident. I don't have the solution, but is that not? Oh, but the method of demolition might be something that could be looked at also, because the house at the corner of Hickman and Byard, it was literally taken apart by hand. They recycled everything they could, and it didn't disturb anybody. As long as the commercial vehicle that they were loading into has a permit to be on the street, it didn't hurt anybody. There was no real noise. So maybe there's a way to accommodate, some expanded timelines for allowing demolition if something like that is done. It is hard because if you've purchased a piece of property and you want to get started and your hands are tied, that's really difficult, especially if you want to be able to get in by the next summer. It's not always possible if you don't have demo until, say, October, to get in by Memorial Day. So, but there may be ways around it to not wholesale let demos occur in the summer, but to open it up for some other mechanism for it. Thanks.
Thank you, Carolyn. There are companies that do environmental destruction, demolition, and that's kind of what Carolyn described. There's one that did that on, I think it was the Norfolk and King Charles several years ago. Came out of Baltimore, and they did do a lot of destruction by hand. And of course, the purpose was to be able to recycle or reuse materials, right? But if you recall, that particular house had a huge two-story stone fireplace and some other thing, the foundation and all that did require backhoe to come in and do it. So it's not a perfect system. Right. It still used noisy machinery for some of that. And of course, even throwing that stuff in an empty dumpster or close to empty dumpster is pretty loud, in the summertime. But that's a good point, Carolyn. Thank you. Anybody else from the public like to offer anything? No? Commissioners?
I have one thing that maybe I'm just being a contrarian today, but I thought what got us into this in the first place was an uproar over a commercial demolition during the dates that everyone thought it was prohibited.
Correct.
So why are we talking about allowing more demolition during the days that everyone reacted so, they reacted when it was happening on Rehoboth Avenue? I'm not sure how we got here.
Well, I think it's like that other example I gave you about the hours. I think people did not know the code. They thought we were violating the code, and that's where they voiced their anger or frustration. And yet, what we found out is they weren't violating the code. So now is the option, though, the opportunity to see if we want to fix that. Do we want to tighten up the definition of demolition so that that kind of demolition can't happen in the summertime?
And I'm struggling with what's the underpinning of outcry to allow more demolition.
I don't think it's.
I'm going like this with what is this solving?
So I think the intent was, in the example that we're all thinking about, the entire structure or building was not being removed. So they did not require a demolition permit, which would have prohibited that activity during the summer. So because the entire structure was not being brought down, it was allowed to happen during the summer. So here, the discussion is, in a situation like that, where it's a portion of the building, we need to better clarify if there's interest in prohibiting that type of activity during the summer. We need to better define what is demolition. If partial demolition constitutes demolition in our opinion, and it requires a demolition permit, then those types of activities would be prohibited by the code. But because how it exists or how it's been applied in years past, the entire building or structure was not brought down, therefore demolition permit wasn't issued, and it was allowed to happen during the summer.
But entire walls were brought down, right?
Yes.
And so I sort of like the definitions that are going with the exterior, because I got to tell you, I think members of the public can be forgiven for not, I don't even think it's so much that they weren't reading the code correctly. I think there's a lot of splitting of hairs here. Yeah. And, in my read of it, I thought that was, a violation as well, but now I understand what the rationale was, but there's a lot of splitting of hair, so I agree it needs to be better defined.
Right. I think one of the points is that if we do nothing, then future hotels, for instance, will be able to be torn down in part because we haven't changed any of the definitions.
And I hear what you're saying in commercial areas, but when we have discussions that are bleeding over into the residential areas of our city, I find that very troubling. Because I believe most people I have been in contact with, they really enjoy the fact that residential demolition is not allowed from May 15th to September 15th. It is a respite from all of the trucks on your street, all of the worker bees on your street, et cetera. So I just will resist expansion of this maybe the short answer for me is expansion of it in a residential area.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
What I'm suggesting is that for all of us, there needs to be an awareness that how we define demolition, if we that it's applicable to everybody right now, commercial and residential alike, and that if you believe that residential should be different than commercial, then we need to clarify that and break it into two components.
Mr. Janis, if I ask you, where in the code do we define demolition?
Thank you, Commissioner. The only place we really make reference to it is in a tree code, other than fees obviously associated with, the demolition process.
So the 105.1, demolition prohibited, that really talks about the timing, and it also has a couple qualifiers in it. So are you suggesting that we create a specific definition for demolition that would be added to the code?
I believe it would be helpful.
So that's a yes.
Yes, Commissioner.
Okay. And would that come from the International Building Code, or is this something that we would create on our own?
Unfortunately, there are just a plethora of different definitions out there when it comes to demolition. There's demolition, there's deconstruction, there's dismantling. As you go down that path, it just gets muddier and muddier. What would be helpful, I believe, to the code is to distinguish what exactly is a demolition, what exactly is a deconstruction, or whatever that process may entail, and examine the different methods of construction that occur on a daily basis, not only in the commercial district, but in the residential district, and not only concerning new construction, but existing construction as well. Selective demolition occurs even when you're building a brand new house. So we have to be careful of how we define that, and then, the application of those different permit applications, if you will.
And is that something you would be prepared to present to us as code changes?
We would be working on it, obviously, with some more guidance. But yes, it was something that we think needs to be corrected in the code book.
And I think we started heading down that route of drafting a definition of demolition, but when we started to look at things like partial demolition and partial demolition requiring a demolition permit, that's where things got a little bit muddy in terms of the differences between residential, commercial, deconstruction, which was mentioned, a means of doing it mostly by hand, preserving parts that would be used later. I think interior demolition, and trying to think of how we would apply demolition, specifically in regards to the issuance of a demolition permit. And I think we didn't quite have consensus in terms of what the expectation was. So part of the reason why we wanted to have the discussion today was to try and get some guidance in terms of how best to define that.
Because right now, it is defined, I realize it's in the tree code, but I think that just muddies the water further, or means that people that looked up a definition, like myself, are confused because the definition in the code says it's the destruction of all or part of a structure.
Right.
So.
Commissioner, if I may, just a little add to that. Even in a roofing project, you have demolition. So you're removing the roof.
Right. No, I get
so you
that.
have to consider all that kind of stuff
Yeah,
as you
I
go
get
down
it.
that path.
Yeah, we need better definitions, I agree.
I thought we had talked about catching this at a site plan review. Are we going to talk some more about what structures should done, what construction should be covered in a site plan review?
I think we're talking two different things. The Planning Commission's been tasked with reviewing 236-30, including concurrently looking at how to implement the CDP recommendation that oceanfront commercial buildings on the boardwalk go to site plan review. I think this is a different thing in my book, demolition, and so Again, they're asking for guidance. I don't know how much you can assimilate from what we've said today.
Well, I think sort of what I'm hearing is that I believe there's some interest in moving forward with partial demolition requiring a demolition permit. I think there's some interest in maybe differentiating between demolition in a residential area versus a commercial area. I think there's also some interest in excluding interior demolition, but things like roofing would be exterior work. So some of those nuances I think we'd have to work through.
Attributable both to defined of residential and commercial.
Right.
So two sets of standards, basically. So is that something we could see in 60 days?
I think so.
But I mean, I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but I think this is an important enough issue that we have some kind of timeline in place that we can react to it. And, you know, we always kind of get behind the 8 ball. It's like, well, demolition, you know, I got to do this because time is closing. I got to, you know, I got an investment here kind of thing. So is it 60 days, 90 days, next year? I mean, you don't have to answer it now, but if you could come back to us with some type of guidance, I think that would be helpful to all of us. And I would also kind of work on the commercial side first, because that's, as Commissioner Sharp had mentioned, that's what really brought this to the surface. So if there's a priority in looking at this, it seems as if you kind of have to do it parallel, commercial and residential, but I would put more weight towards the commercial aspect of it initially. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Anybody else? Anybody from the public? Further comment? Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next item of new business, which is discuss codification of current outdoor dining on public space policy. If you recall, right now, for allowing outdoor dining on public space, which means public sidewalks essentially, we have a policy in effect. And when we adopted that policy, we indicated that it would be for a limited time, and I can't remember what the time, ending November 1st, perhaps, question mark. But the point is, we indicated that we would look at it again later and seek to codify it. I think that's a definite, that we need to codify it and reiterate what the rules are. Again, if you recall, I mentioned earlier that in October, we would be reviewing end-of-year reports from Rehoboth Beach Patrol, Police Department, Recycling, Parkland. I want to add on there, from Building and Licensing, we'll get an end-of-year report on outdoor dining on public space. And at that time, all I'm trying to seek today is to give you an awareness that I'd like to task Glenn with starting to look at codifying that policy. And that before that is completed, we will have that end-of-year report and be able to critique it and see if there's any changes that we want to have put in place. So is there any comment from the commissioners? We'll just go that route? Yeah.
Good.
Okay. Anybody from the public want to say anything? Okay, so we'll move forward with that. Thank you very much. With that, the next item of business is discuss need for enhanced codes regulating awnings, canopies, and marquees overhanging public space, and how to address existing awnings, canopies, and marquees that are currently not permitted. This stemmed from some situations from Building and Licensing, so I'm going to turn it over to Evan.
Thank you, Mayor. So I may turn it over to Matt here in a minute, but essentially we have received requests for the construction of awnings on the facade of particular buildings. Currently, we do not have any provisions in the code except for awning signs. Again, there's no current code requirements that regulate awnings, canopies, marquees, how they're defined, all of which in most cases overhang public property. And most of the ones that exist today are not permitted through a license agreement. However, a few of them are. So it seems like it was a little bit selective in terms of which ones were and which ones were not. A little bit of background. So again, I had mentioned 270-55 regulates awning signs. No real details in terms of awning construction, materials, anything like that. And there is currently the regulations that exist in International Building Code, which specifically address encroachments that are less than 8 feet above grade, encroachments that I believe are 8 to 15 feet above grade, and then encroachments that are above 15 feet over grade. So there are some regulations in International Building Code that we can look to further clarify our regulations within our code. The next couple slides just show examples of what we sort of define as awnings. We also have an example of a retractable awning. Some examples of sort of how we would define canopies. And then also some examples of how we would define marquees.
These are all support documents.
Yes, all of these, these are included in the agenda as a support document. And then there are also some awnings that are more permanent in nature, so they are sort of an extension of a roof or are inclusive of some type of roof overhang. So in general, we're looking for a resolution. We want to codify the city's requirements for awnings, canopies, and marquees, which would include defining these different types of overhangs, addressing the existing overhangs that we see out on the street today, and then also establishing criteria for new overhangs. So this was just an introductory topic that we wanted to make you aware of. If there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
So in the future, possibly as early as the October workshop, you might come back with a draft ordinance, because we're starting from scratch here, to address and be able to authorize building and licensing to issue permits for awnings, canopies, marquees, and whatever. And so that'll be on a future agenda. Any comments, questions? Anybody from the public? Short and sweet. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We are going to move next.
Solid waste?
Still waiting for Karen.
We're going to go down to the H.
Okay, good.
And to discuss the 2 fountains installed by the city in Silver Lake, including operational costs, challenges, and desire to maintain or remove. This is something that came to my attention only after the fact, after they were installed. I think I was a commissioner at that time, but not the mayor. And city manager, I don't even know the reason or why or how they came about, how they were funded, but poof, they were there. And all I know now as mayor is that complaints come in consistently from close by neighbors that either want to see them moved or relocated or just taken out for different reasons. Also getting complaints about medical issues, that they're aerosoling the moisture droplets, causing health problems. And I wanted Evan to put this on the agenda. The end result will be that we take a vote on it at a regular meeting to see whether we keep them or not. But I wanted to have all of us to have an awareness and some background on this from Evan, that relocating is certainly feasible, but there's a cost to it. And how do we know every time we relocate them, whether we're not going to then upset the next property owner that has them in the visual? And I know people up here love them and hate them, but it's time that we address it. So, Evan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. So I'll provide a little bit of background. I know there, at least one of the questions that I was asked was about the original cost for the fountains. So both fountains were a total of $30,000, which included the fountains themselves and then also the installation costs. We did spend about $6,000 to run a new cable further out into the lake, and then also installed a wind gauge in the amount of $2,500, which basically allows the fountains to turn off when there's strong winds to help prevent some of the mist spreading to adjacent properties. The annual cost of operations really is just the electricity when they're not being moved or relocated, and that's at most maybe a couple $100 a year. We do pay a $150 annual winterization service, which is provided by Envirotech. And the cost really to relocate some of the fountains really is dependent on where it's being relocated. The locations that we have them in now, there is an existing electric panel there, which they are tied into. I believe the two fountains have cables that are 500 feet in length. And that's about the furthest that we can go from the electric panel. So if the fountain were to be relocated elsewhere within the lake, we'd have to find an area where we can install a new electric panel and then run the 500-foot cord out into the lake. In terms of relocation, the fountain on the west side of the bridge, I believe, has been relocated once, and the fountain on the east side has been relocated twice. And I do have a map of each relocation, which I can pull up in just a minute. And certainly we have received mixed comments. We've received numerous concerns about the fountains, mainly in regards to the mist spreading over to the adjacent properties, onto the gazebos and things like that that protrude out onto the lake. At the same time, we will also hear comments as soon as the fountains are off, asking why they're off and demanding that they be put back on. So we have received mixed comments, and as the mayor mentioned, we thought it was best to bring it before you all for discussion today. And I'll walk over and pull up the map now, Mayor.
Thank you. So we'll have a discussion up at the table here, and then we'll go to the members of the public.
So that's a map with rough locations of where the fountains were and where they are today. So on the west, you can see it was relocated once, and then on the east, relocated twice. In both instances, trying to get them a little bit further away from the bridge, as well as some of the neighboring properties. And that's all I have, Mayor.
And Evan, where, can you point to where the, I'm not sure I can see it. Can you point to where, I think it's off the thing, where the electrical outlet is?
Yeah, Kevin will show
I'm
you.
just trying to gauge how long that distance would be.
It's right here at the bridge abutment.
The north is the top.
Yes.
Right about where you're,
East, south.
Right where the cursor is, right at that
okay.
bridge abutment.
And the distance you now have that cable is to position number 3. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Both of those cables are at about 500 feet in length, which is the length of the cable. They're about
Period.
at their limit right now.
Yeah. Have you, I know this is something you didn't anticipate, but there is a electrical connection behind across the street from my house on my lakefront. Have any idea how far 500 feet would put it out in the middle of the lake? It would be very visible from the highway at that point.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it would get us quite near the center of the lake, but
Well, or close to it?
yeah.
Yeah.
Are you in Google Maps?
I'm not. No, that's just a picture.
Okay. All right.
Because that would be that would be a direct distance from straight out into the middle of the lake. it wouldn't get to the middle, but it would get quite a ways out there.
It's right where that blue Christmas tree goes.
Evan, I have a question. Are these decorative or do they serve a purpose?
So I believe the intent of the fountains were more decorative. I mean, they provide a little bit of aeration, but I don't think by any means they were purposefully installed to help in the lake health for
We've got-
aeration purposes.
Yeah, we've got the Lake Gerard, we have bubblers.
Yeah.
Right.
And they truly aerate the lake.
Well, that was going to be
But
my
they're
next
hidden
question,
underneath.
so.
For these, I've heard from Envirotech and from Sola, I believe, that they're not aerators. They may perform some function of it just by the water hitting and splashing back into the ground, but they are not intended as aerators. And that we do have some citizens here that will speak perhaps to that, but.
So that was my next question, then. We don't have complaints about the ones in Lake Gerard, do we?
No, I personally haven't heard it.
Because they're just.
They're just bubblers.
They're not
Right.
fountains.
Subsurface, right.
I have a question, Evan. On the fountain on the east side, does it always have to be at that height? Are they height adjustable?
I don't know that they are.
No, they're not. They're specific to that head. So we did swap out the heads, which I don't think we mentioned earlier today, but it was higher and broader.
Okay.
So, you know, we've moved them, we've put the wind gauge out, we've changed the heads. I think we've exhausted every potential solution at that site. We either love them and leave them there, or it's got to go somewhere else, right? If we believe the complaints, then it's got to go. Yeah. I don't know what else we could do to maintain a fountain. We got the wind gauge, and we've moved it about as far as we can physically move it.
So we've got some citizens here that we'll let speak in a minute. I believe one of their contentions is that the aerosols blow over their way and/or are a medical problem. We do have people that have contacted us over the year on the opposite side, on the west side of Bayard to these gentlemen that are complaining about the aerosols also with more vigor. They complain, I think. If there's no further comments, let's we'll go to the public after you. Go ahead.
Do we want to talk about the option of moving the East Fountain over to Lake Gerard, where it would probably be more effective as far as oxygenation? I think they oxygenate more than the bubblers. They move a lot of water, but still, I don't believe it will move the needle as far as oxygen in the lake, in Silver Lake. They might have a bigger effect in Lake Gerard, if that's what our goal would be.
I missed what you said at the beginning. I heard you say Lake Gerard.
I said Lake Gerard, yeah.
I absolutely don't want to go there. I don't want any fountains in Lake Gerard, and I'll fight you harder over that. Commissioner Sharp, go ahead.
Well, just in full transparency, previously when there were some complaints from one property that I knew of on the west side, which is, I live on the west side, I invited City Manager Lynn and Public Works Director Mr. Williams into my home to say if it needed to be moved, if the west side needed to be moved. We talked about a couple of things, that we have a very shallow end of the west finger of the west side, and that little section past Turtle Bridge, and it's very, very shallow. And I don't know if, I'm talking more about what I don't know than what I do know. I don't know if that were to ever come to pass, if there was an available fountain, that it could possibly work in that shallow water? Would it be more helpful in that shallow water rather than think about Lake Girard? The other thing, when I was aware of that complaint on the west side, I also offered, because I live right by the street ends of Scarborough and Scarborough Extension. That's city property in there. That could the west fountain be moved down there to the city property? I went so far as to offer to pay for the cable. Is that correct, Mr. Williams?
I would agree with your recollection.
Thank you. Because I didn't think it fair that the cost, because I know there are projects that always have some in favor, some not so in favor. So I just honestly did not think that was fair for our taxpayers to have to bear the cost of whatever the cost would be for cable or for, and I also offered you could hook it up to my electricity. I'd be happy to pay for it. So I just wanted to put that out there that we've been down this road on the west side, and I didn't hear any more about it. The fountain was then relocated, as it clearly shows on the side, and I do not know if I have never heard on the west side any additional complaints. Evan and yourself, Kevin Williams, may know more about that than I do, but I just wanted to make it clear that maybe there's an alternative for, if a fountain becomes available, maybe there's something that could be worked out on the west side. But that could cause other issues. I don't know how neighbors would feel about it, but it could certainly be discussed.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anybody else up here? Let's go to the members of the public. Anybody would like to say anything? Go ahead, sir. If you would give us your name and your relationship to the city, please.
Francis Fabrizio, 123 Lake Drive.
Yes, sir.
The mist from the fountain, when the wind blows out of the south or the southwest, blows all over our property. I have some respiratory issues. I don't want to be breathing that stuff. There was an article in the paper maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago by Save Our Lakes, and they discussed the storm sewer situation in South Rehoboth. A lot of the streets empty into Silver Lake, so they get pesticides, they get fertilizer, dog waste, oil and grease from the streets. When I asked Miss Lynn last year, she said they had no record of any tests that had been done on the water. My attorney contacted DENREC. DENREC knew nothing. I've got to think that that water is filthy. Nobody has discussed the goose poop that's on every lawn surrounding the lake. I'm guessing geese also poop in the water. I don't know that for sure. We can see clouds when the wind is blowing, clouds of mist that roll towards the bridge. People walking across the bridge, biking across the bridge are inhaling that stuff. We've had instances where we can't use our gazebo because of the mist. Just depends on which way the wind's blowing. So I would say it ought to go. As far as the people that are concerned when the fountain is off that they don't like it, I'll say in the last 60 years, there have probably been 100, maybe 200 wedding pictures and weddings performed on our front yard. It's the most bucolic part of Rehoboth. There's a good chance that there are more photographs of Silver Lake and the gazebos than of any other place in the state of Delaware that I know of. I mean, T-shirts in magazines. And when we came down and found a red, white, and blue flashing fountain out there, I mean, we were devastated. The city never gave any of the people on Silver Lake any notice that a fountain was going in there. So I would ask that you just get rid of it. I think it's awful. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you leave, you indicated at the beginning that you get mist on your property. Is that north of Lake Drive or just on
No,
the?
I'm on the east side. I'm the second house east of the bridge.
Correct. And we'll have him point.
You can see the first gazebo is the large one, which is 125 Lake Drive. I'm the narrow one to the right of it. And as far as the device that turns the fountain on and off in the wind, hasn't worked for quite some time. When it did work, it didn't work well.
Thank you, Mr. Fabrizio.
Thank you.
Any questions of council? Thank you very much. Essentially, Mr. Fabrizio's property is the top right of the photograph there. Anybody else from the public like to say anything? We do have a letter that's embedded in our agenda from Tom Childers and John Hall, who are here. You can feel free to say something or let your letter serve as testimony. And while he's coming up, he is the top of their property is the top immediately to the right of the Silver Lake Bridge, and the first gazebo on the right, to the right there. Your name and relationship to the city.
John Hall, 125 Lake Drive. I just want to add more about the wind beater that's supposed to be turning the faucet off, or the fountain off. It really needs to be investigated because I don't think it has worked successfully since it was put in. And I went over and looked at where it was installed, and it's the standard kind of rotating wind gauge, but it's right up against a utility pole. So the wind, I mean, that just completely obliterates the wind flow by it. And so I don't think it ever had a chance to do what it was supposed to do even in the beginning. And that the wind is the big problem there. Okay.
Very good. Thank you. Anybody else from the public like to say anything? If not, I would like to put this on the agenda for consideration of vote at the next meeting, whether we keep them or whether we relocate them or whatever other actions we decide to take on them. I would like to see some conclusion and see us vote on it so that we're sticking our necks out.
Mayor, in that you talked about relocation, would the presentation include exact areas of relocation, or so we could have some information to make decisions on in that regard?
Well, I would say, who's going to make a decision on where they go? I'm not sure I want city management to make a decision on where they go, because if they blow again and somebody else, we move them, and then a whole new set of people don't like them, then what have we gained? Well, it will have validated my desire to put these on and either get rid of them or whatever. But that's my biggest concern. Where do we move them that doesn't piss anybody else off or cause additional health concerns? And again, they're not cheap.
No, I'm not questioning that at all. I just wanted to know in the presentation if there would be specific opportunities. We've had a couple mentioned here today, if they would be considered or not. So I'll wait to see what the presentation is.
We can map them, and then I would say any decision needs to be the board's decision, not the city manager's decision at this time.
From my perspective, it seems like a number of solutions have been tried that didn't work.
Right, right. Mr. Go ahead. Stand all the way at that microphone. There you go.
Tom Childers, 125 Lake Drive. It's difficult to get into aesthetics, but but I'm going to have to, because the aesthetic of Silver Lake is a natural lake. A fountain detracts from the naturalness of that lake. I would like to see them gone.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you. So again, at our September 16th regular meeting, this will again be on the agenda for additional discussion and consideration of path forward with them. Evan, anything else on this topic?
I think so.
And then bring it back. All right. We want to get out. There's a meeting in here at 1 o'clock, and yet the city manager and I wanted to do one more bit of business. We'll keep an eye on the clock. We will not finish this business today. We will continue it over on the regular meeting in September for continued discussion. Not a vote at that time, but just continued discussion most likely. We'll see how far we get today. But this is a situation that comes up that the city manager and I want to have your awareness on. And we're going to let city manager explain some of the concerns.
Thank you, Mayor. So over the summer, I know Mayor and I had received at least one complaint about refuse containers being put out much sooner than the allowable time. Mayor has a support document in the agenda, which basically outlines section 227-9 of the city code and 227-11 of the city code. Both deal with time limits on the collection of yard waste, recyclables, and refuse. So the code currently states that refuse and waste containers or recycling can't be put out any earlier than 6 p.m. on the day prior to a collection day, and that it must be removed from city property not later than 9 p.m. The concern that we heard from one of the residents was that, again, cans were being put out much sooner than the allowable time. I had a meeting with Karen from KK Can Care, who has joined us today, to talk a little bit about their operations, currently how many customers they serve as a valet service provider here in the city, and again, talk with them a little bit about their business operations, again, challenges that they faced. Because in this particular case, one of the concerns that we heard was specifically about KK Can Care. So I asked Karen to be here today just to be able to provide the commissioners with an update in terms of their business, their operations, how many customers they're currently servicing, and some of the challenges that they face. So Karen's here and available to. All
right. Thank you. Let me give you some background very quickly, because I was one of the authors with another commissioner on this ordinance in front of us. The desire was at that time, several years ago, to address the proliferation of waste cans that are put out on the street, particularly too early, and particularly by non-residents that were leaving for a couple days, for the week, for the next weekend, and the empty waste vehicles would be out on the street for up to a week until they came back again. And so we addressed that, and after a lot of discussion among all the commissioners, we passed this ordinance that essentially says waste can't be put out before 6 p.m. on the day preceding collection. And again, the desire was to deal with aesthetics, so that we had a nice neighborhood. We wanted it to look clean, be clean, but also it was to try to keep stuff off the street, keep animals from getting into it. And at that time, we also have some rules about bagged items that can be put out in bags without a solid container, but they needed to be put out the day of collection in the morning. So what happens is the early date of 6 p.m., nothing can be put out 6 p.m. I think in retrospect works very well overall for residents that are living here, and they can do it by themselves. But what we're finding out is that when you have a valet vendor doing it, and they're doing hundreds at a time at 6 p.m. and trying to put them out, hundreds, we'll hear from Karen how many hundreds she does, trying to put them out between 6 p.m. and the end of the day, for them at least, apparently has become problematic. And so they want to start earlier and earlier and earlier. And that's why we're here today, because of a complaint of that, they're being put out way too early. And so it's for us to decide, do we want to, first of all, do better enforcement? And number two, do we want to consider changing that 6 p.m. time to something earlier? Again, my thought is that these vendors, valet vendors, businesses germinated from this law dealing with aesthetics. And so I have a hard time giving them too much leeway, but we wanted to put that in front of you all. Do you want to finish anything? So,
Mayor, can I?
Yes.
I mean, this is simply an enforcement issue. I mean, there's a rental house next to me that's been, their stuff goes out 2-3 days all summer long, and we're just not enforcing it. So I don't think we need to change times. I just think we need to enforce the laws we have.
Well, and if you agree with that, then what we're asking is this particular business or other valet vendors to modify their template, their model. And
I don't know if it's the same vendor, but the one that does them on my street was putting them out yesterday way before 6 o'clock. So.
Right.
Okay.
So we have one of the vendors here, Evan mentioned. When you're ready, we'll invite her up. Anybody have anything to say? Would you mind? And we'll have you over at the lectern. Just that microphone works better. Over at the lectern. Help her adjust that.
Not sure you'll be able to see me under this.
Well, watch this magic.
That was money well spent.
Hey, we paid a lot for that lectern, and we've only used it 4 times. Thank you, Karen.
Okay, as he mentioned, I'm Karen Kolobilski. I started KK Can Care when this ordinance was passed, and this is our 7th summer being in business, and we provide service year-round. So first thing I'd like to say since it's the end of the season here, is just applaud the city for the job that the trash workers did. As of our 7 years working, this summer went by the smoothest. The city workers pretty consistently had all the trash cans done by 2 o'clock. And a lot of days it was much earlier. And that makes our job easier because you are getting the cans put back in a more timely fashion when the city, because we're at their mercy to put the cans back. And the same thing with the recycle company. The north side of town, trash and recycle goes on the same day. So it can be a nightmare for us on Fridays because we have the trash following one schedule and the recycle, they don't coordinate. So we may go to a home, the trash may be done, but the recycle may not. And this summer, it seemed like on Fridays, the city was done way before noon and the recycle company was too. So we were able to get the cans back. So that was a big help for us. But really putting the cans back is not an issue for us because we want the cans to be out as little as possible. So we do pretty much as soon as we see the city has them done, we put them back. The biggest challenge for us is the 6 o'clock rule. And back when I started the business, we always followed the 6 o'clock rule because I'm a rule follower. And it upsets me that the way the ordinance is written, that I can't follow the rule because it's impossible. And also when the ordinance was written, as he stated, that there were not trash valet vendors. So we are the biggest one, I believe. We have, when I started in the beginning, we had 30 customers. And now we have over 400 customers. Wow. And our customers have also become more annual customers. In the beginning, we had seasonal, and then once they got used to the service and realized how much easier it made their life, many of the seasonals turned to annuals. And then I also find with new people coming into the community and calling our service, they immediately now go to the annual. They don't even do the seasonal. And part of the thing with our company compared to the service that the city provides for valet is we provide service for trash, yard waste, and recycle. So the yard waste and recycling is a valet service that they can't get from the city. So the biggest challenges facing us is in the winter months, it gets dark at 6, so it gets dark at 5. So unless you're an individual putting your own can out, how could any company follow that rule? Because it's not safe to put cans out after dark. My son in the winter months may put a hood over his head. I wouldn't want him walking in people's yards with a hood in the dark. And as many of you probably know, we do the whole service on our bikes. So we're not going to ride our bikes in the dark either. And even though someone may say that they see cans out, that doesn't necessarily mean those are cans that we've put out, because we try to do it as late as we can. And when we go out to do the cans, there's plenty homeowners have put cans out, and also on Virginia Avenue, Maryland Avenue, where you have some of the condos, they have their maintenance that put the cans out. And they are not coming in the evening back to put them out. Some of them, are out. I'm not throwing them under the bus. I'm just saying that it's for people that are working the day shift at those places in maintenance, they're gonna put the cans out during the day, frequently in the morning. And the other thing in the summer months, which of course is our busiest time, you have thunderstorms. And we have to change our schedule. We have to be flexible, because if they're calling for an evening storm to roll in 5 o'clock, we can't start putting the cans out at 6 with the storm there. And pretty much to put the cans out takes 10 man-hours to do one half side of the town. And, it's pretty much my husband. It started off, it was my son and myself doing the job. And it continued that way for a long time. If you run into my husband, he will tell you he's the unpaid intern, because we just kind of pulled him in to help out on our busiest days. Now we've got to the point where my son and I can't do it by ourselves with over 400 customers. So my husband helps us on our busiest days. And then the other time that's very challenging for us is on Thursdays. That's our biggest nightmare, because we have the south side of the city that the trash needs to be put back, which we want to put back in a timely fashion, but then the recycle has to be put out that night. And when we go in the late afternoon, early evening, we see recycle cans out everywhere that are not our cans. I can go around Country Club Drive and I see lots of cans and they don't belong to us. Now, we get noticed because on certain streets, we probably have about 75% of the houses on that street. So when we put our cans out, it is very noticeable, but it's not just us. And then also with the day with yard waste, that say for today, we have trash to put back on the north side and yard waste to put out for the whole city. So I don't think, well, as my adult children have told me, we need to work smarter, not harder in today's world. And for us, it doesn't make sense that we would go out, put out, bring back, let's say on Thursdays. It doesn't make sense that we would go back and put 200 cans of trash back and then go back at 6 o'clock that night and try to put out those exact same cans, same houses, the recycle. So that's our busiest day. Besides on the south side, putting back trash, putting recycle out for the next day, we also have on the north side of town, we have to put the trash and recycle out for Friday's pickup. So we're pretty much servicing on Thursday nights the whole city. And there's no way that we could start that at 6 o'clock. And so our idea of what would be ideal for us would be that we would like to see, right now, the way the ordinance is written, you have 27 hours that a can be out, because you have 6 o'clock to put it out after 6 o'clock, and you have till 9 o'clock the next night to put it back. And I don't really think the putting back is an issue for anyone, because most of the cans that get put out seem to get back in a very timely fashion. I'm not sure why people on vacation, but they love to put the trash cans back. I think it's men that come here and they're so used to going to work and being busy, and now they're on vacation and they don't know what to do with themselves in the morning, so they love to try to beat us and get the can back before we can. So I'm not sure with that. But my idea would be, I know that our cans are not out more than 24 hours. We always, if we put them out, let's just say 3 in the afternoon, all our cans are back by the next day. And then you say, well, how could you measure that? Well, there is a law with cars, abandoned vehicles, that you can't leave a car for more than 24 hours. And I found in the city that the easiest way to enforce laws is usually your neighbor tells on you. So if your cans are out, then it's pretty obvious. With us going around town, I can see the cans that are out. You can see, I think it's the chronic people that are causing the cans to be left out for more than 24 hours. And I think that was what the whole ordinance was for the ones, I don't think it was arguing over a few hours of what time they were put out. So.
Thank you, Karen. We have a hard stop at 1:15 today, so I wanted to thank you for coming. I will continue this discussion at our regular meeting on the 16th. Is there any questions anybody has of Karen?
Appreciate having the background. That's great. That's great. Useful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very helpful. Just to mention that the city has a valet program, but it's different than their model. Our model is our guys that are with the truck go into the backyard as they approach somebody's house, pull it out, empty it, and put it back. The model that KK Can Care uses, they go out and precede all our trucks, pull them out, and then go to the next one. And then obviously they want to follow up as quickly as they can after they're emptied and go then. And I think that's maybe what lending to some of the problems is that when they put a container back, they would prefer to pull out the next one. And if you think about it, some of these containers are empty at 8 in the morning. And so if they're putting things back at 8 in the morning and pulling something out at 8 in the morning, it tends to be a problem. So Tim, yes, maybe it's an enforcement thing. We've got building and licensing that can enforce it, and streets department that's capable of enforcing it. I think there's been a lack of desire for a little bit on the city manager's part, trying to resolve it otherwise. So are there any questions? Otherwise, we'll carry this over. Karen, thank you very much. We appreciate everything you're doing. With that, thank you very much. With that, are there any commissioner announcements or comments?
Mayor, I have something. As this is my last regularly scheduled meeting anyway, and this is very difficult for me, so please bear with me. But I just wanted to say a few things in closing. I've really enjoyed being a commissioner these last 3 years. I don't think there's ever been a more challenging time to be a commissioner than the time we're in now. And most of you, in fact, I think Glenn and I were the only ones that were sitting up here when the city shut down suddenly, days before we were set to approve the annual budget in March of 2020. So much of my first year and even my first 2 years in office were spent in uncharted territory. But in that time, we all mastered Zoom lighting and audio. And despite the difficulties, we've continued to conduct business on a monthly basis, and the city has been well managed by its dedicated staff. It's been a real learning experience for me, and it's one I will never forget. Mostly, I've learned that serving in our government requires patience and increasingly an open calendar. I've also learned more than I ever wanted to know about wireless communications, wastewater, and trash. So I'd like to thank all of you, my fellow commissioners, the city staff, and the citizens of Rehoboth Beach for the opportunity to serve and for your support these last 3 years. You've been a great group to work with. And I thank the mayor for taking all my calls every week as I try to sort through all the agenda items. But don't forget, we have one more tree meeting before I leave.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan.
And yes, that leads into review future meeting dates. Next Tuesday, September 13th, is another special meeting on trees, which sponsored by Commissioner Gay. The next meeting after that's our September 16th, I think it is, regular meeting. And with that, are there any additional citizen comments that can be done within 1 minute? No, and so with that, thank you very much. Very productive. Thanks for hanging in there. I'll adjourn this meeting at 12:42 p.m.